Chapter 3683. Yi Xian sighed as he looked at the two bodies of Di Yi's clones. This was definitely a good thing. Every inch of skin on the surface of the two clones was definitely made of the highest quality materials. After all, Di Yi was the patriarch of the Heavenly Legacy clan, and with the foundation of the Heavenly Legacy clan, the patriarch's electronic consciousness, how could the doppelganger's body be inferior? Unfortunately, he could not think of a way to use these two doppelganger. Of course, Yi Xian could use the doppelganger system again, like how he had refined the devouring doppelganger. He could split two strands of primordial spirit and refine two doppelganger. However, this was obviously only a thought and could not be put into practice. The doppelganger system attached to Yi Xian's devouring doppelganger system was still at the initial stage. In the initial stage, one could use a strand of primordial spirit as a primordial spirit seed to refine a doppelganger. There was only one slot available, and it had already been used by the devouring doppelganger. The previous refinement of the electronic doppelganger was not included because the method was different. In fact, even if there were still two slots available, Yi Xian would not have made such a choice. Even if it was an auxiliary system, it was extremely difficult to upgrade it. The slots for refining doppelganger using the primordial spirit seed method were too precious. Yi Xian had only chosen to use one slot to refine a perfect doppelganger because he had encountered a heaven-defying existence like the devouring treasured body. Although the two shells of Di Yi's electronic doppelganger were also top-grade goods, they were obviously not just a little bit inferior to the devouring treasured body. Just these two shells were not worth Yi Xian using the doppelganger system's primordial spirit seed quota to refine a perfect doppelganger. After a period of depression, Yi Xian could only put the two shells of Di Yi's doppelganger back into the undying world in his body. Then, after pondering for a while, Yi Xian decided to use the last day to collect another nine-eyed golden crystal. He wanted to see what kind of ancient god he could get this time. Among the multi-eyed sense crystals, even the eight-eyed silver crystal was not perfect. Only the nine-eyed golden crystal contained the bloodline inheritance of the ancient creature that gave birth to this crystal. It could be a divine ability or a cultivation technique. Before this, Yi Xian had obtained a total of 108 nine-eyed golden crystals from the mysterious corpse pool in the ancient cage connected to the Forbidden Valley of the inner city of the Demon Emperor. He had already used two of them. Not only did the two nine-eye golden crystals allow Yi Xian to absorb a large amount of pure mental energy from the crystals, they also allowed Yi Xian to obtain two Supreme Ancients' bloodline abilities. They were the primordial Xianxia's heaven-falling bow and the Netherworld Emperor's netherworld claw. Since he had nothing to do now, Yi Xian decided to take out the third nine-eyed golden crystal and start collecting it. He still had a total of 106 nine-eyed golden crystals in his hand, and they were more or less the same. Although there were subtle differences, he couldn't tell which supreme primordial existence each crystal corresponded to from these subtle differences. In other words, before he finished withdrawing, Yi Xian had no way of knowing which ancient sovereign's bloodline inheritance he would obtain after he finished withdrawing. It would appear at random. Of course, even the worst bloodline inheritance or divine ability would not be that weak. After all, those who could still turn into corpse flowers and produce nine-eyed golden crystals after death were all supreme existences in the remote antiquity era. At the very least, they had to be in the remote antiquity era. Almighty! For an existence of this level, how could their bloodline talents and inherited divine abilities be of little value? After making his decision, Yi Xian immediately took out a small spatial box from his undying world. Inside was a nine-eyed golden crystal. This item was too precious. Each one represented the bloodline inheritance of a supreme of the primordial era. It was definitely a rare resource that could only be found by chance. Therefore, Yi Xian didn't dare to store them together. Each one was stored in a separate spatial box. He had only randomly picked one of the 106 small spatial boxes, which made Yi Xian feel excited. Perhaps he had won the grand prize this time and obtained a nine-eyed golden crystal that contained an extremely powerful might that even surpassed the terrifying divine ability of the desolate ancient Xianxia's heaven-falling bow. This was also possible. With this kind of expectation, Yi Xian quickly sat down cross-legged. After opening the small spatial box, he threw the nine-eyed golden crystal inside to the devouring system. He immediately ordered the devouring system to extract the pure mental energy contained in the nine-eyed golden crystal, and began to absorb it from all directions. However, this time, he didn't expect the mind source core in his sea of consciousness to undergo another metamorphosis and evolve into a level 9 source core. A similar surprise had occurred not too long ago after all. A mind source core's metamorphosis wasn't that easy, so two metamorphoses and evolutions in a short period of time were obviously not going to happen. It was impossible. However, the pure mind power contained within the nine-eyed golden crystal would allow his mind source core to become even more solid. This would lay a solid foundation for the next transformation and evolution. After all, the only thing Xianxia was looking forward to was the bloodline inheritance of a supreme of the primordial era or an almighty of the primordial era. The results were out very quickly. When all the pure mind power contained within the nine-eyed golden crystal was extracted by the system and channeled into the mind source core in Xianxia's sea of consciousness, the familiar sound of a system notification rang out clearly in his mind. Ding! Congratulations to the host for obtaining the ancient primordial era. The devil ape's true body is a bloodline inheritance of the primordial devil ape. It is a unique secret technique used to condense the devil ape's physical body. In the next moment, before Xianxia could recover from his shock, his original primordial spirit consciousness suddenly trembled and was forcefully pulled into an inheritance scene. The background of the image was very familiar. It was still the scene of the Great War that had taken place countless years ago. However, this time, the focus of the inheritance image wasn't on the primordial Wuxia or the golden divine dragon. Instead, it was on a humanoid creature that Xianxia found extremely familiar. It was a desolate ancient demon ape with 3 heads and 6 arms. It even had 3 torsos, standing back to back as if the 3 heads were glued together. It was a few thousand feet tall and its aura was terrifying. It was not as strong as the golden divine dragon or the void giant tortoise, but it was stronger than the void ladle and the other desolate ancient demon apes. Its cultivation base was somewhere between the primordial era and the almighty of the primordial era. What was even more shocking was that the 3 bodies of the ancient devil ape were completely different. One of them was a body of flesh and blood. It was completely black and its fur flickered with a faint glow. It was obvious that it was extremely tough. The other one was a skeleton. Its entire body was grayish gold and exuded a metallic texture that gave off a sinister vibe. Chapter 3684. Xianxia had indeed seen the ancient demonic ape in the inheritance picture. To be more precise, he had seen an ancient demonic ape that looked very similar to the one in front of him. The ancient demonic ape wasn't a creature from the primordial era. It had been a descendant of the ancient demonic ape. Back when Xianxia had entered the core of the land of all evil, he had seen an ancient demonic ape among the corpses of many experts at the edge of the area. The ape was thousands of meters tall, but perhaps because it had died a long time ago, Xianxia couldn't see the remains of the ancient demonic ape. The aura he had sensed from the remains was only at the peak of the 9th rank of the Star-Lord state. It was much weaker than the real ancient demonic ape. Therefore, the remains of the ancient demonic ape should only be a descendant, not a real one. What Xianxia had seen in the inheritance picture of the 9-eyed golden crystal was the real ancient demonic ape, which had an extremely powerful aura. Also, the inheritance picture represented a bloodline inheritance of the ancient demonic ape. It wasn't a primordial technique like the fallen sky bow or the netherworld claw, but something similar to the Dongshu void realm. It was a secret technique. The difference was that it seemed to be a body tempering technique called the true body of the demonic ape. It was a special bloodline secret technique that could condense the body of the ancient demonic ape. The inheritance picture soon ended. Xianxia also finished his cultivation and opened his eyes. As expected, his mind was completely silent. There were no system notifications. His spirit core had just evolved from a level 7 to a level 8-1. It couldn't have evolved again so quickly. However, Xianxia had gained a lot this time, because the method of condensing the true body of the demonic ape was very suitable for him at the moment. On the one hand, he happened to have 2 shells of De's clones, which were made of the most precious materials. He could melt them and put them to good use. On the other hand, according to Xianxia's guess, this time, the second universe's 10 million troops were most likely heading towards the source of all evil. Xianxia would definitely follow them, but he wasn't in a hurry right now. The source of all evil wasn't a good place, even if the second universe had an army of 10 million. For a while, they definitely wouldn't be able to get too far in. Xianxia was absolutely certain that they would not be able to get close to the Netherworld Cauldron due to its terrifying pressure. As for entering the Netherworld Cauldron, there was no need to even think about it. However, Xianxia was still worried. He had to go over and take a look. If he needed to take action, his identity as Mo Ju Feng should not be exposed. In that case, if he could condense the devil ape true body before that, then everything would be fine. The core of the root of all evil was originally home to a large number of ancient ferocious star beasts. When Yixian appeared in the form of a three-headed, six-armed ancient demon ape, no matter what he did, even if he turned the second universe's allied army upside down, he would not feel any pressure. In addition, the devil ape true body had 3 heads and 6 arms. It had never appeared in the outside world before, so the outside world had no idea what the abilities of the devil ape true body were. At that time, Yixian would be able to use more divine powers and spells. For example, he could use the black fog body to use all kinds of secret spiritual skills and divine powers of the demons. As for the other 2 bodies of bones and flesh, they could use the netherworld claw and other divine powers respectively. Even if these divine powers and spells had been used by Yixian in several of his previous identities, now that they appeared in the ancient demon ape true body at the same time, it would not arouse any suspicion. After all, this kind of creature was too rare to be understood by the world. It even had 3 heads and 6 arms, so what was so strange about it knowing more divine powers and spells? Thinking of this, Yixian became excited. Without hesitation, he immediately pulled up the information related to condensing the devil ape true body from the system's database. Soon he understood everything. At this time, he found that there was a small blood golden ball in his sea of consciousness. It was only the size of a longan. Obviously, it was the bloodline secret seed that he had obtained from the third 9-eyed golden crystal. It was related to the bloodline of the ancient demon ape true body. Only through this bloodline seed could the devil ape real body be successfully condensed. Otherwise, even if one knew the method to condense the devil ape real body, no matter how much resources one invested, it would be impossible to condense the real devil ape real body. After understanding everything, Yixian immediately took out the 2 bodies of the first Emperor Avatar that he had just put into the Undying World and directly threw them to the doppelganger system. Soon, the 2 bodies of the first Emperor Avatar were completely melted and turned into a ball of light. All the materials were traced back to their original source. This method of condensing the doppelganger was different from the perfect doppelganger of the devouring treasure body. This was actually a kind of bloodline condensation, which was between the doppelganger and divine powers. The most important thing was the small blood golden ball in the Sea of Consciousness in Yixian's Sea of Consciousness. Without it, it would be impossible to succeed. This small blood golden ball was quickly taken out from the Sea of Consciousness by Yixian, and also handed to the doppelganger system. It was immediately inserted into the ball of light formed by the melting of the first Emperor Avatar's body, and completely merged with it. It was a perfect fit. Immediately, a familiar system notification sounded in Yixian's mind. Ding! Congratulations to the host. The devil ape true body has been condensed. Overjoyed, Yixian's consciousness quickly returned to his senses and entered the Sea of Consciousness in his mind. Sure enough, he saw a 3-inch-tall ancient demon ape floating in the air above his Sea of Consciousness. It also had 3 heads and 6 arms, and had 3 different bodies. However, its eyes were tightly closed, and it was located between the black gold dragon scales and the ink. Between the small green claws. At this time, there were already 7 small objects that represented different meanings in the air in Yixian's Sea of Consciousness. Floating in the middle of the Sea of Consciousness was the Rai-D seal that contained the 9 thunder source balls. Floating around the Rai-D seal in a circle around the Sea of Consciousness were the other 6 objects. They were the Spirit Source Core, the Void Essence Crystal, the Fallen Sky Bow, the Black Golden Dragon Scales, the Netherworld Claw, and the Devil Ape True Body that had just been successfully condensed. Yixian could no longer hold back and immediately withdrew his consciousness from the Sea of Consciousness. Then, with a thought, he activated the 3-inch devil ape that was floating in the air above the Sea of Consciousness. He wanted to test the power of the devil ape true body. After all, he would enter the root of all evil starfields soon. If there were no accidents, he should appear in this form. Now, he needed to familiarize himself with it in advance. Buzz! A faint roar sounded from Yixian's body. This was the sign that all the blood and qi in his body had been mobilized in an instant and was circulating at full speed. At this moment, the 3-inch devil ape that was floating in the air above his Sea of Consciousness disappeared and turned into a mysterious force that merged into Yixian's body. It had a mysterious effect on all the blood and qi in his body. Chapter 3685. One of them was a skeleton that was entirely grayish-gold in color. It exuded a metallic texture and gave off an extremely cold feeling. The other was an illusory body made of black fog. Its aura was ethereal as if it did not exist at all. It was completely a black fog. Only its two eyes shot out two terrifying rays of blazing red light. These two bodies were also 10 feet tall. They were connected to the back of Yi Xian's original body and formed the devil ape true body with 10 heads and 6 arms. Ding! Congratulations to the host for breaking through the blood chi realm. Current realm. Void level 6. Ding! Congratulations to the host for breaking through the blood chi realm. Current realm. Void level 7. Just as the devil ape's true body appeared, a familiar system prompt sounded out in Yi Xian's mind. His physical body's chi and blood realm actually broke through in one go, going from the previous void rank 5 to the current void rank 7. This was obviously the work of the devil ape true body. The 3-inch devil ape that floated above Yi Xian's sea of consciousness was the ancient devil ape's bloodline secret seed. It had fused with a ball of energy formed from the body of De, which had been completely decomposed. Now, Yi Xian had activated the devil ape true body for the first time. This directly led to some kind of transformation and evolution of his original body. The result was a breakthrough in the blood chi realm of his physical body. It had to be said that this was definitely a huge surprise. Yi Xian did not expect this at all. What was even more unexpected was that the cultivation aura emitted by Yi Xian, who was currently in the state of the devil ape's true body, actually far surpassed the true strength of his original body. In other words, he was only at the 7th level of the void realm, and had reached the terrifying 14th level of the cosmic light realm. A full 2 realms higher. This was understandable. After all, Yi Xian was currently in an activated state of the devil ape's true body, possessing 3 heads and 6 arms. Among the 3 different forms of the devil ape, only the flesh and blood body was Yi Xian's original body. However, due to the influence of the devil ape true body, its appearance was that of a black devil ape. However, if it was only this flesh and blood body, then the cultivation strength it displayed was the true state of Yi Xian, which was the 7th rank void realm. But now, he had 3 heads and 6 arms. In addition, he had 2 skeletons and a black fog body. These 2 bodies were formed by the fusion of the shells of De's 2 doppelgangers. They were equally powerful. When the 3 bodies merged into one, the overall cultivation level displayed would naturally soar by a large margin. It was completely understandable that he had reached the 7th level of the cosmic light realm. Of course, this kind of cultivation level could only be possessed by the 3-headed, 6-armed devil ape true body. Once Yi Xian removed his devil ape true body and his 3-headed, 6-armed state would disappear. Then, his cultivation level would instantly return to his original level, which was at void level 7. The power and strength that belonged to De's 2 avatars retracted and transformed back into the 3-inch little devil ape, appearing above Yi Xian's sea of consciousness. Yi Xian was extremely satisfied with this devil ape true body. After a moment of delight, he started to consider the mystic abilities and abilities that the devil ape true body could display. The black fog body was the simplest. Yi Xian tried to activate the mind source core in his original body's mind and successfully transferred it to the head of the black fog body. With this mind source core, the black fog body would be responsible for using all mind power techniques, mystic arts, and mystic abilities. Of course, once the 3-headed 6-armed devil ape true body was removed, the mind source core that had been temporarily transferred to the black fog body would instantly return to Yi Xian's mind. As for the skeletal body, after some thought, Yi Xian transferred the netherworld claw, which had been suspended above his mind's mind, to the depths of the skull of the blood gold skeletal body. In the future, this skeletal body would be responsible for using the netherworld claw. Of course, it would need to change its form a little. It couldn't be exactly the same as the real netherworld claw, but this wasn't difficult. Finally, as Yi Xian's original body of flesh and blood, he could directly use his fists to attack. He could also use the withered demon blood blade to change its form. After all, this blade had been upgraded to a starry sky treasure not long ago. The demon blade in Linghu Young Master's hand was only a quasi-starry sky treasure. Changing the shape of the demon blade slightly wouldn't arouse suspicion. With that, everything was settled. Yi Xian now had another identity that was suitable for roaming the starfield, the source of all evil. It was perfect to the extreme. At this time, an entire 3 days had passed since Yi Xian went into seclusion. In the end, it took him a long time to absorb the 9-eyed golden crystal. Even the refinement of the devil ape's true body wasn't completed in a short period of time. After removing the 3-headed, 6-armed devil ape true body, Yi Xian returned to his imperial brother, Mo Jinfeng appearance. He waved his hand to remove the restriction and stepped out of the temporary cave residence. The depths of the valley outside the cave residence were quiet. The large and small fortresses and strongholds that had been moving in and out of the valley were no longer in sight. It was obvious that during these 3 days, the million warships had all been transferred into the farmer god cauldron. However, the permission that Yi Xian had previously granted only allowed entry and not exit. Otherwise, if he wasn't present, it would be troublesome if the purplish warbler, Duanmu Xiaocha, and Zhao Qianru secretly sneaked out. It was not a big deal for the 3 of them to sneak out, but if they did something bad before they sneaked out and brought out something, it would be a real headache. In order to prevent this from happening, Yi Xian could only deal with it this way. In other words, all of the devil cultivator experts who had driven the million battleships into the Shenong cauldron were still waiting in the cauldron. They were probably all gathered in a single stronghold by now, waiting for Yi Xian to temporarily release his authority. This large stronghold full of devil cultivator experts would be able to drive out of the cauldron. Yi Xian sent a wisp of his consciousness into the farmer god cauldron. Originally, he wanted to inform Sennas that he was about to grant him permission, and let him prepare to take all the demon experts out of the farmer god cauldron through a stronghold. However, the scene that he saw made Yi Xian stunned for a moment. The wisp of consciousness that had just entered retreated in the blink of an eye. Damn, these 3 crazy girls are going to ascend to the heavens. After cursing, Yi Xian shook his head and smiled bitterly. Without hesitation, he immediately rushed to the mouth of the farmer god cauldron. His figure quickly entered the cauldron through the endless 9-colored fog that shrouded the mouth of the cauldron and entered the cauldron's space. Soon, his figure appeared in the sky of the cauldron's space and landed directly on the vast plains to the north of the central domain volcano's crater. At this time, the area around the central domain volcano's crater was densely packed with fortresses and strongholds of all sizes. There were a total of millions of them. At a glance, it was indeed very shocking. But what was even more shocking was the scene on the northern plains. Tens of millions of demon experts were crowded together, all holding their heads with their hands and squatting on the ground, their faces full of anger. Chapter 3686. At this moment, Old Man Wenxing's heart was on the verge of breaking down. Even though he was currently the 2nd clone of the mechanical core and was far weaker than the 1st clone, he was at least at the cosmic light realm, which was the 14th realm. However, at this moment, he was being bullied by 3 girls who were merely at the mystic light realm. Not only were all of his cultivation resources and treasures taken away, but he was also being held captive and squatted on the ground with his hands on his head for 2 whole days. This was simply tragic beyond compare. If it weren't for the fact that he had to rely on his identity as Channa's to get close to Prince Xian and find a way to follow him around and slowly dig out his secrets, he would have simply wanted to immediately take action and slap these 3 crazy girls to death on the spot. You 3 crazy girls, if I don't take care of you for 3 days, then you will go and destroy the roof tiles. What are you up to this time? Just as he was feeling grief and indignation, a figure descended from the sky. It was Prince Xian, who had appeared as the demon's royal brother, Mo Jinfeng. Channa's expression turned bitter, and he immediately stood up to welcome him. With a sullen expression he complained, Lord Shah, you're finally here. If you didn't come, we really wouldn't have been able to endure this. We've already been squatting here for 2 days, but you insist that we are an enemy invasion. Enemy invasion? Ugh! Yi Xian immediately understood what had happened and immediately covered his face in pain. After all this time, these 3 girls had thought that the various forts and fortresses that were heading towards the Shenong cauldron were an enemy invasion. This was really F***ed up. Why didn't they think that if the enemy was really invading, they wouldn't have not fired a single cannon? In the end, the million-strong army was still captured by these 3 girls. Who am I? The 3 girls from the purplish warbler also knew that it was a misunderstanding, and their faces were filled with embarrassment. With a flip of their hands, they each took out a small space box and threw it at the grief-filled Channas. They didn't dare to dawdle with Yi Xian any longer and turned around to escape to the volcano in the central region. All right, it's just a small misunderstanding. The 3 girls have already compensated, so let's end this matter here. Hurry up and board the ship. I'll give you permission to leave immediately. After he finished speaking, Yi Xian waved his hand and soared towards the mouth of the Shenong cauldron in the sky. He didn't have the time to deal with the 3 girls. He was still thinking about the matter of the Second Universe's alliance army. Behind him, Channas grumbled bitterly. This is not compensation, this is returning the stolen goods. Tens of millions of Abyss Devils experts have all been plundered by them. Yi Xian's body trembled. He felt his vision darken, and he almost fell from the sky. These three crazy girls, after all this fuss, they actually learned the bad habit of looting a burning house. As soon as Yi Xian rushed out of the Shenong cauldron, a starry sky fortress with a diameter of 100,000 meters followed behind him, directly rushing into the atmosphere of the Demon Emperor planet. After closing the access, Yi Xian waved his hand and put the farmer god cauldron back into his body. After that, he flew into the sky and rushed towards the Demon Emperor city. After a short while, in the royal palace of the inner city of the Demon Emperor city, great-grandfather Mo, the current uncle Mo Qigong, the Demon Emperor Mo Wentian, and the other senior members of the royal family of the Abyss Devils were all present. They told Yi Xian about the changes in the situation in the outside world in the past few days. At present, it has been confirmed that the allied army of the Second Universe suddenly launched a large-scale invasion of the First Universe. Their final target is the root of all evil star region, which is not far from the Tianji star region. That's right. Although the army of the Second Universe is still on the way, and it will take about 10 days for them to reach the root of all evil star region, 10 Star Lords have already left the main fleet and rushed to the front. Yesterday, they arrived at the root of all evil star region ahead of time. They are guarding it and forbidding any starship of the First Universe's slave races from approaching. Because of the sudden migration of the Tianji star region, the primary network of the First Universe's star network has been completely paralyzed. Right now, the First Universe no longer has a primary network signal that covers the entire universe. However, the ancestral land of every slave race has a secondary network, and the races in the lead can still communicate with each other. They can communicate with each other instantly. Therefore, when the specific information about the situation in the root of all evil star region was delivered to the Abyss Devils, it was basically a day later. In other words, the latest information we received was what happened a day ago. Right now, all the races in the First Universe are ready to make a move. After all the races in the First Universe thought that the allied army of the Second Universe suddenly invaded the First Universe for the Tianji star region, but now that the truth has been revealed, the races in the First Universe suddenly became suspicious and suspected that there must be something in the root of all evil star region. Otherwise, why would the races of the Second Universe's Federation mobilize so many people? Right now, the space rats and hell ants, which are also ranked in the top 3 among the slave races, have jointly issued a statement calling on the slave races of the First Universe to form an allied army again and rush to the root of all evil star region. Their slogan is also very direct. The root of all evil is the root of all evil of the First Universe. No matter what benefits there are, it shouldn't be the allied army of the Second Universe that comes to pick the fruits. In addition, this news should have already been received by the humans of the Third Universe. After all, the front of the Abyss Devil star region is a plane-level large-scale wormhole that connects to the Third Universe. In that area, the human scouts of the Third Universe are still relatively active. This matter can't be hidden at all. Within 3 days at the latest, it will spread throughout the 3 universes. At that time, the 2 camps of the human race in the Third Universe will definitely make a move. If nothing unexpected happens, the battleship army of the Immortal Dynasty and the Starry Sky battleships of the Tenju Heavenly Palace will all arrive. Even the headquarters of the Myriad Luo Federation will not sit idly by. The races of the Second Universe's Federation had previously used the banner of a crusade against the Tianji clan, claiming that this was a grudge between the races of the Second Universe and the Tianji clan. It had nothing to do with the human race and the Myriad Luo Federation, but now the lie has been exposed. Even if it's just a matter of face, it's impossible for the Myriad Luo Federation to not make any moves. If things go wrong, the law enforcement department of the Myriad Luo Federation's Overwatch Council, which is the Senlon fleet, will be fully deployed. At this point, the upper echelons of the Demon Royal family stopped talking at the right time and did not continue to speak. However, their gazes all gathered and landed on Yi Xian's face. Obviously, they were waiting for his response. They wanted to hear his thoughts and opinions on this matter. As expected, the ultimate goal of the allied army of the Second Universe is really there. Nodding thoughtfully, Yi Xian turned to look at Grandpa Mo and replied unhurriedly, "I understand. Whether it's the battleship army of the Immortal Dynasty of the Third Universe's Science and Technology Camp, the Starry Sky battleships of the Cultivation Camp, or the Sinlon fleet of the Myriad Luo Federation, after coming to the First Universe, all of them have to go to the Tianji Star region. Everyone who wants to go to the source of all evil has to pass through our demon territory. Do you mean, we should do a few more robberies and extort more money in the name of passing fees?" Bang, 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 bang. Chapter 3687. Chapter 343. Greedy wolves howling at the moon. It could be said that given Lang Lai's unyielding and monstrous level, he would definitely become a giant in the second universe when he matured. However, when he came to the third universe of the human race, he encountered young Master Linghu, who had already been publicly acknowledged as a peerless monstrous existence of the human race in every aspect. Previously, no one had thought that the young clan leaders from the second universe would end up being eaten alive by others. But now that the facts were in front of their eyes, and two of the young clan leaders from the top 10 clans had already fallen into such a state, they couldn't help but worry about it. Although Ji Jinghong and Jiao Riqian's combined battle prowess wasn't as good as Lang Lai's, the difference wasn't that great. After all, they were both at the great perfection of the Origin Ninth Realm, and they were both young clan leaders from the top 10 clans in the second universe. The disparity in strength between them couldn't be as great as Tian Yuan's. If that was the case, Lang Lai wouldn't be ranked in the same range and circle as them. Therefore, when Lang Lai appeared in the huge silver light screen above the Shenong Cauldron, all the powerhouses outside the space trap formation tensed up immediately. There was naturally no need to mention the situation of the second universe's allied forces. Lang Lai was the most powerful existence among the 13 young geniuses from the second universe who had entered the cauldron, and he was also the third to encounter young Master Linghu. Therefore, the outcome of this battle was extremely crucial. It was said that things shouldn't happen more than 3 times. Once it happened more than 3 times, one's psychological bottom line would collapse. Moreover, Lang Lai's position was the highest among the 13 people. If he couldn't escape the tragic fate of being eaten by young Master Linghu, would the remaining 10 existences still have any chance of survival? This meant that the 13 young masters from the second universe's allied forces who had entered the cauldron would all be eaten up and completely annihilated. Such a tragic outcome was definitely unprecedented in the history of the second universe's allied forces. The intensity of the chain reaction that would be triggered was simply unimaginable. Because of this, when Lang Lai's figure appeared in the silver light screen, the vast universe's void outside the space trap formation instantly became so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Even the 2 grieving elders of the Silver Ji clan and the Barbarian Bull clan no longer shouted angrily. They were also nervously watching the silver light screen within the space trap formation. At the same time, in the space within the Shenong Cauldron. After a short exchange of words, Yi Xian and Lang Lai, who'd just arrived, quickly started fighting. According to Yi Xian's original intention, he'd originally planned to mock them a few more times. In any case, he had nothing to do, so he wasn't in a hurry. It was rare for him to encounter such a good opportunity to anger those old ghosts outside, but they couldn't do anything to him. Yi Xian didn't want to let go of this opportunity to solidify his notoriety. Only by making people completely afraid of him, with his identity as young Master Linghu and his current situation of being the enemy of the entire world, would he be able to minimize his troubles in the future. At the very least, there wouldn't be many annoying flies that would come. Even though it would be a big problem and a big crisis, Yi Xian had the ability to jump through the universe's coordinates, so he wasn't afraid at all. The only thing he wanted was to have fewer annoying cats and dogs. That would delay him from collecting all sorts of heavenly and earthly treasures and rare minerals to concoct gene liquids, as well as preparing for the Shenong Cauldron to boil the great medicine of heaven and earth in the future. However, Lang Lai wasn't like that. He'd long since exploded with anger and wished for nothing more than to immediately kill Yi Xian. Moreover, he could tell that he wasn't a match for young Master Linghu at all. Thus, as soon as he arrived, he didn't say anything else. After reporting his identity, he immediately started fighting. Yi Xian continued to fight by himself, including Shen Yuanziying, Gong Wuxin, and the other prisoners of war, who had successfully broken through to the 9th Great Realm of Origin, Shen Yuanziying, Gong Wuxin and the others. He didn't order them around, allowing them to fight on the ground as he soared into the sky. A woo! In the air, 100-meter-tall silver-haired giant wolf suddenly raised its head and howled towards the sky. Although it wasn't the first time Yi Xian had heard the wolf howl from Lang Lai's mouth, this fellow had already howled many times before he even arrived. However, the howl of the wolf this time was clearly different. There was no anger, not the slightest bit of emotion, but it seemed even longer. There was a strange rhythm within it that caused Yi Xian's heart to tremble, but he couldn't say what kind of feeling it was. In the next moment, a strange scene appeared. As Lang Lai's long howl resounded throughout the cauldron, a silver moon slowly appeared in the sky of the space within the cauldron, right under the enormous silver screen of light formed by Gong Wuxin's crystal ball. When this scene entered their eyes, Gong Wuxin and the others on the ground all had their mouths wide open. Even Yi Xian was a bit absent-minded for a moment. This was clearly the inner space of the Shen Nong cauldron. Why would a bright moon appear? Without a doubt, this strange bright moon was related to the unyielding wolf. It was summoned by the mysterious wolf howl. It was as if it was summoned by this long howl, or rather, condensed out of it. Just as Yi Xian was puzzled and wanted to ask the devouring system for advice, Gong Wuxin's expression changed drastically as he cried out involuntarily, "Greedy wolf howling at the moon." This is the legendary greedy wolf howling at the moon. This is an ancient divine ability passed down in the greedy wolf clan's bloodline. Not every greedy wolf clan member can awaken it. Sometimes, it's normal for several generations of clansmen to not be able to awaken it. The bright moon in the sky is not a real entity, but a projection of a divine ability. It possesses a mysterious power, and it is said that wherever the light of this bright moon shines, all the energy will be taken by the user of this strange divine ability, devoured and controlled at will. In this way, the clansmen of the greedy wolf clan, who have this kind of bloodline ability, are in an invincible position. He is like a real greedy wolf, able to replenish his energy endlessly in battle, greedily plundering all the energy under the bright moon, including his opponent. These words caused a wave of exclamations from the prisoners of war below. Even Yi Xian, who was high up in the sky, couldn't help but be moved when he heard this. To be able to continuously devour energy for his own use in battle was truly heaven-defying. However, he was only moved. If he were to say that he was envious, he definitely wasn't. Compared to his devouring clone, this divine ability was still a little lacking. The energy devoured by the devouring clone could be turned into his own cultivation and strength, and could be realized after refining it. However, from the analysis of the illusory moon in the sky, it was a projection of a divine ability. The energy it absorbed was most likely a one-time consumption attribute. Although it was not bad, it was not perfect and could not solve the fundamental problem. Moreover, it was still unknown whether this bright moon's power was as powerful as Gong Wuxian had described it to be. As for the specific power, he would know once he tried it. Chapter 3688. Who asked you to make a real war chariot? If that's the case, there won't be enough time. How long will it take to build 7 war chariots? Hearing Mo Qigong's words, Yi Xian immediately rolled his eyes and woke him up. These 7 war chariots can only be shells, and they can't all be black spirit war chariots. I have to make one of the 4 war chariots in my hands, and you guys can do as you see fit with the other 3. Previously, even the 10 million troops of the Second Universe's Federation obediently paid the toll. In addition, I will stay here and wait for the myriad Luo Federation's Blue Fleet, the human race's universe battleship, and the technology faction's Immortal Dynasty's fleet to pass through before leaving. If nothing unexpected happens, the fleets of these 3 forces will also obediently pay the toll. After all, they rushed here for the good fortune of the source of all evil. Why would they bother with us here? At that time, even the fleets of these 3 forces will be like this. The rule of charging a toll in the demon domain will definitely spread. At that time, which small force would dare to take the lead? Wouldn't that be courting death? At this point, Yi Xian grinned. Of course, if one of the fleets of these 3 forces doesn't want to pay the toll, then that's fine. I'll use them as a sacrifice, and the effect will be even better. In any case, among the 4 war chariots in my hands, after a few days of recovery, 2 of them have been restored again. With the power of one strike, it's enough to give them a painful blow. The 2 war chariots that Yi Xian was talking about were the Time Chariot and the Void Chariot. These 2 war chariots had been activated once in the previous battle. When the 10 million troops of the Second Universe's various races passed through, they had almost recovered. Moreover, for days had passed, so they had recovered just in time. In the end, the upper echelons of the Demon Royal family discussed for a while and agreed with Yi Xian's suggestion. The order to build 7 empty war chariots was quickly given, and it was believed that it would be completed within a few days. In any case, it was just an empty shell of a huge war chariot, and it didn't even need to be suitable for spiritual power transmission and transmission. During the process, it was very convenient to use special materials that had amplification effects to forge them. In the end, Grandpa Mo told Yi Xian that the dozen or so Star Lords of the Demonkin race would stay on the 3 stars of the Demon Emperor, but he would take the other 2 Star Lords to the root of all evil star zone. After all, even if the demon race did not participate in this battle, they could not completely stay out of it. Even if they went over to take a look, it was still necessary. He warned Yi Xian that when the time came, the three of them would change their identities and not show their faces as devil cultivators. However, when Yi Xian saw the three Star Lords together, he should know that it was them. Yi Xian nodded and said, "Similarly, when you see someone with 3 heads and 6 arms, that's me." These words once again caused the upper echelons of the devil cultivator royal family to be dumbstruck. They didn't know if he was joking or if he was serious. 3 heads and 6 arms? What the hell is this? Yi Xian's guess was correct. On the same day, the Demon Emperor planet received a message from the scouts in front. Battleships began to rush out of the large plane-level universe wormhole that connected to the third universe. The army of a certain force was rapidly gathering. In fact, the 3 observation fortresses from the third universe had already learned that the final target of the second universe's army was the root of all evil star zone 2 or 3 days before the demon race. These 3 10,000-meter-tall fortresses had been following behind the army of millions of soldiers from the various races of the second universe. The 3 major forces in the observation fortresses all had spies in the army of the second universe in front of them. However, the status of these spies in the various races of the second universe was not very high, at least not high enough to know in advance. The final destination of this army of millions of soldiers. When they finally found out the news, the first universe secretly spread it out and was learned by the 3 observation fortresses that followed closely behind. The 3 observation fortresses made a prompt decision and did not continue to follow. This news must be reported to the third universe as soon as possible. Therefore, they followed for a while and then returned. They activated the concealment array and passed through the Devil Cultivator Star Zone, entering the large plane-level universe wormhole at the front of the Devil Cultivator Star Zone. At this time, the army that was gathering outside the wormhole that connected to the third universe was the Blue Fleet of the Wan Luo Federation. In fact, the fleets of the Wan Luo Federation, the Jianghu Heavenly Palace, and the Immortal Dynasty had all gathered at the other end of the wormhole before the army of millions of soldiers from the second universe passed through the Devil Cultivator Star Zone. They had no choice but to prepare for such a large-scale planar war. Meow, the matter was too big. Because of this, after confirming that the ultimate purpose of the army of the second universe's invasion of the first universe was not to fight with the Tianji clan as they had said before, but to seize some kind of great fortune in the root of all evil star zone, the fleets of the 3 great forces immediately mobilized. They decided to go to the first universe. Among them, the Blue Fleet was the official law enforcement fleet of the Wan Luo Federation after all. Under the banner of holding the army of the second universe accountable, the Immortal Army of the Immortal Dynasty and the Star Battleship Army of the Jianghu Heavenly Palace were courteously allowed to enter the wormhole first and rush over. After learning this news, the Demon Emperor Mo Wen Tian immediately ordered the 5 million battleships of the Devil Cultivator race to set off immediately and head to the outer defense line thousands of miles away from the Demon Emperor 3 stars. They cut off the main route to the central region of the first universe and waited patiently for the arrival of the Blue Fleet. A day later, Yi Xian received a notice that the 5 million battleships of the Blue Fleet had been assembled and were heading towards the Demon Emperor 3 stars along the main route to the central region of the first universe. They would arrive in half a day. He immediately left the Demon Emperor planet and rushed to the outer defense line of the Demon Emperor 3 stars. When he arrived in the void in front of the 5 million battleships, he waved his hand and summoned the 4 starry sky war chariots in his body. They lined up with the spirit war chariots that had been waiting there. The 5 war chariots once again stretched across the void. Half a day later, the Blue Fleet arrived. The person in charge of commanding the entire fleet in the flagship fortress was Long Huai, the leader of the Overwatch Council of the Federation. He could be considered Prince Xian's uncle. This time, the Blue Fleet had mobilized nearly half of its forces to denounce the army of the second universe. Therefore, as the leader of the Overwatch Council, Long Huai personally led the fleet. Chapter 3689. Old thing, are you crazy or are you still asleep? Why am I waiting here? You still haven't figured out the situation, right? Without waiting for Long Huai to finish speaking, Yi Xian, who was standing on the golden battle armor, rolled his eyes and mocked bluntly. Don't pretend to be confused here. I don't care what kind of Federation Council you are from. This is the territory of the demons. No matter who it is, if you want to pass, you have to pay the toll. Stop talking about those useless things. If you can't take it out, then go home as soon as possible. Why are you pretending to be rich? Scram. Pfft. As soon as Yi Xian finished speaking, the Overwatch Council's Long Huai, who was in the flagship fortress of the Senlon fleet, was so angry that he spat out blood on the spot. His identity was extremely extraordinary. He was an important member of the royal family of the Immortal Dynasty, the eldest brother of the current Immortal Emperor, and the dignified Overwatch Council of the Wanluo Federation. Now, he was actually robbed by a so-called royal brother of the demon race. Moreover, he was directly reprimanded as a pauper who pretended to be rich. He even told him to scram. This was simply intolerable. Why aren't you saying anything? You're dumbfounded now that I've seen through your dirty thoughts, aren't you? Humph. Even the tens of millions of troops of the various races in the second universe obediently paid the toll. With your small fleet of 5 million troops, you want to get through? Not to mention a door, you don't even have a window. Although Yi Xian did not see Long Huai's expression, he could roughly guess what was going on with his imagination. At this moment, his entire body was comfortable. He had long disliked that old thing. Previously, when Yi Xian returned to the Immortal Star for the first time, he had been kidnapped from the Star Dock to the Federation's Overwatch Council before he had even arrived. It was very difficult. This time, he had finally avenged his great hatred. In front of countless experts, he ridiculed the dignified Overwatch Council's Overwatch Council. This feeling was extremely wonderful. It was so good that he was bubbling. Faced with his ridicule again, Long Huai wisely remained silent and did not respond. He frowned and began to think. If it were him, he would have immediately become enraged and annihilated the entire demon race. However, this time the Federation's Overwatch Council, in order to be able to rush to the source of all evil at the earliest possible moment, only the 5 million Sen Blue fleet that had been gathered at the other end of the wormhole had been personally led by him. On the opposite side, the demon camp fleet that cut off the main route to the central region of the First Universe also had a scale of 5 million battleships. In addition, there were also 5 Star Wars. Long Huai had personally witnessed the terrifying might of these 5 starry skies many times before this. He'd always been in the observation fort that the myriad Luo Federation had dispatched. In fact, under the deterrence of these 5 starry sky weapons, even the tens of millions of allied forces of the First Universe had no choice but to submit, pinch their noses, and obediently pay the toll fee. He had seen it with his own eyes. It could be said that he was quite familiar with Mo Jinfeng's unruly nature. Normally it would have been fine. He could not lose face by wasting time here to fight him head-on. Behind him, the immortal army of the Eternal Dynasty and the Starry Sky Warship Legion of the Tenju Celestial Palaces would complete their assembly in a few days and arrive one after another. If there was a need, the Federation's Overwatch Council could send a follow-up fleet to the First Universe at any time. Even if the 5 starry skies in the hands of the demon race were at war, they were only a small race after all. There were only 6 to 7 million battleships of various types. They could be exhausted to death if they fought head-on. However, that was under normal circumstances. It was impossible now. Although Long Huai had come to the First Universe under the banner of the Federation's Overwatch Council questioning the allied forces of the Second Universe, in fact, his true purpose was to rush to the source of all evil and seize the good fortune there. He simply did not dare to imagine how shocking the benefits that could make all the races in the Second Universe be on such a large scale. At present, the allied forces of the Second Universe would be able to reach the source of all evil in about a week, but he had just arrived in the First Universe and was already too far behind. He really could not delay any longer. He was even unwilling to see the Immortal Army and the Starry Sky Warship Legion, which were one step behind him, catch up. The strength of the 2 enormous fleets was also extremely extraordinary. They both had the scale of 5 million battleships. It was fine if it was the Immortal Army. After all, he was also a higher-up of the dynasty. He would just share it with the higher-ups of the dynasty and the elders equally. If the Starry Sky Warship Legion of the Tenju Celestial Palaces caught up and the benefits fell into the hands of the Cultivation Camp, then he would really be unwilling. Thus, after weighing the pros and cons, Long Huai gritted his teeth and finally decided to be like the allied forces of the Second Universe. He would first endure. The important matter was more important. They wanted a toll fee, so he would just give them a sum of resources. The entire fleet brought a large amount of supplies. A sum of cultivation resources was quickly put into a small space box and sent to Long Huai. You go and do it. I don't feel at ease if someone else does it. Remember that Mo Chofeng brat is crazy. Don't talk to him too much. Otherwise, he'll go crazy again if you don't agree with him and add more variables. As he spoke, Long Huai handed the small space box in his hand to his deputy beside him. It was the deputy director of the Federation's Overwatch Council, Hongdou Lifeng, and asked him to take a space fortress with a diameter of 100,000 meters to pay the toll fee. After all, in order to maintain a safe distance, the two fleets were now more than 10 million kilometers apart in the cosmic void. Don't worry, Director. I will take care of this matter. No matter how unreasonable that brat is, I will just ignore him. Anyway, I'm just going over to pay the toll fee. Hongdou Liefeng's eyelids twitched, but he did not take this matter to heart. He continued indifferently. After handing over the small space box, I will return immediately. I will definitely not make any mistakes. Soon, a space fortress with a diameter of 100,000 meters drove out from the Senlon fleet. Then it performed a space jump. After 2 or 3 flashes, it arrived in the void that was only a few thousand kilometers away from the 5 space fortresses and stopped steadily. Hongdou Lifeng did not dare to bring his attendants. He stepped out of the fortress alone and crossed the void with his physical body. He arrived 100 kilometers in front of Xianxia. Then, he waved his hand and threw the small space box at Xianxia. Without saying anything, he turned around and returned the way he came. At this moment, his eyelids suddenly twitched wildly. He had a bad feeling and did not dare to delay any longer. Seeing this, Long Huai, who was in the main flagship fortress in the distance, nodded. Soon, Xianxia reached out to take the small space box and used his divine sense to investigate. Compared to the Second Universe's Alliance army, this Long Huai was really stingy. Coincidentally, when he saw that the person who came was his old enemy, Hongdou Lifeng, he could not hold it in anymore. Since the other party had given him a chance, there was no reason not to make good use of it. With this thought in mind, Xianxia's expression immediately darkened. He raised his hand and smashed the small space box in his hand into the cosmic void opposite him. He roared angrily, F***CK, are you trying to send a beggar away? Since you guys are so insensible, I've changed my mind. The toll fee will be charged according to the number of fleets. Chapter 3690. As a punishment, the guy who came just now can forget about leaving. War of Time. Blast him. Following Xianxia's roar, the War of Time under his feet instantly activated. Xianxia had no intention of letting Hongdou Lifeng return alive, including the 100,000-meter-long fortress that sent him here. On one hand, he deliberately let the War of Time be activated again, proving once again that the War of Time in the hands of the demon race was not an existence that would be cooled down for a long time after one use. This was to lay the foundation for his departure soon. On the other hand, it was to set a warning for the fleets of the immortal dynasties and the 10 Jiu celestial palaces that would arrive in the next few days. With the Second Universe's tens of millions of troops, as well as the powerful Federal Overwatch Council, these two behemoths had first suffered at the hands of the demon race in the Starry Sky War. Any subsequent forces that came would not be so unlucky. All of them would obediently pay the toll fee. Of course, this so-called toll fee originally had no standards. There were rules but no standards. This was obviously not right. Xianxia took advantage of this opportunity to set the standards. All fleets that passed had to leave behind 1% of their battleships or equivalent cultivation resources. Take the Senlon fleet in front of them as an example. 5 million battleships. 1% was 50,000 battleships or equivalent resources. This was definitely a huge war windfall. With a few more large fleets of ships, the demon race would make a huge profit. It made sense to make a windfall in troubled times. At the same time, this standard was set in anger by the demon race's royal brother, Amo Jiofeng, because of the Senlon fleet. This was no different from helping the Senlon fleet and Long Huai draw hatred. It was likely that all the forces that paid the high toll fee in the future would secretly hate him. In short, one should not underestimate Xianxia's simple roar. The effect and benefits were killing many birds with one stone. It was really too worth it. Of course, just exterminating Hongdou's Lifeng and sending him over with a diameter of 100,000 meters wasn't worth the full force of the Time War. Therefore, as Xianxia roared, he gave the order to the Chenkuan slime that was overseeing the Time War beneath his feet. However, don't use all of your strength. Just use a small amount of the war horn's power. Even so, the scene after the activation of the Battle of Time was still extremely shocking. In an instant, countless experts from both sides were all stunned. Buzz! As an extremely soft buzzing sound rang out, a circle of formless ripples instantly spread out from the Cosmos Slime's body, entering the 4 walls of the core beehive node. Following the pipes connected to the outer walls, The ripples were instantly transmitted to the thousands of beehive nodes of the time war zone. At this moment, the tens of millions of golden slimes in all the beehive nodes trembled at the same time. The long golden thread under their abdomen blossomed with a dazzling radiance. Then, their entire bodies shone with golden light. Layers of golden screens overlapped with each other and converged together. In the end, the light gold turned into a rich golden color. As if it had a spirit, it rushed into the four walls of the beehive nodes and followed the pipes of the outer walls back. From all directions, it surged towards the core beehive node. All of this was completed in an instant. In the end, the dense golden light gathered from thousands of beehive nodes all converged and entered the core beehive node. The core beehive node in the central region of the ninth ring inside the huge mouth of the Xianxia suddenly lit up and completely turned into a golden light. The world. At the same time, waves of golden ripples spread out along the war horn like tides. In front of the huge horn, they evolved into a golden fan-shaped ripple and rapidly expanded forward. The first wave represented the power of tens of thousands of years of time. It turned into a huge golden fan shape and pushed forward mercilessly. "Save me!" "No." At this moment, Hongdou Lifeng, who had turned around, finally understood why his eyelids kept twitching. It turned out that this simple matter of giving him a toll fee was actually a great calamity to him. A life-and-death calamity that seemed to have no vitality at all. Now, he was extremely regretful, and his intestines were green. If he had known that the guy behind him was crazy, he would have accepted this task with such certainty. He really died too unjustly. Unfortunately, this realization came too late. Just as he screamed in horror, the fan-shaped golden tide of time behind him, representing the power of 10,000 years of time, had already arrived. It instantly drowned his body. The power of 10,000 years of time was instantly added to his body. With Hongdou Liefeng's cultivation strength, he couldn't withstand it at all. His flesh and blood were instantly peeled off and turned into white bones. In the end, even the white bones decayed and turned into flying ashes. In the still flowing golden tide of time, they were completely annihilated. In the next moment, the fan-shaped golden tide of time covered the 100,000 meters in diameter starry sky fortress that had sent him here. Boom! There was a deafening boom, but there was no explosion. The starry fortress with a diameter of 100,000 meters crumbled in the blink of an eye. Its dragon bones crumbled, and it turned into a pile of crumbled alloy garbage, floating in the void. A Star Lord might have been able to withstand the passage of 10,000 years of time, but it was completely different for the cold, lifeless warships. The entire fortress had been disintegrated after only one wave of time. All of this happened too quickly. In less than a breath of time, when the first fan-shaped golden tide of time faded away, the Hongdou Lifeng had completely vanished. That 100,000-meter-wide interstellar fortress had also turned into a pile of cosmic garbage. One wave of time was enough to solve everything. However, that was the only wave. 10,000 years of time was enough to finish off the target. Naturally, there was no need for a second wave. However, when the Battle of Time killed the Star-Lord from the colorful Python clan in the second universe, 3 golden tides of time were unleashed. It meant that the Battle of Time could at least trigger 2 more golden tides of time of the same power. In fact, that was indeed the case. Yi Xian purposely only sent out one wave because he wanted to tell the other fleets that even if the power of the Starry Sky battle armor had a cooldown period, at the very least, the battle armor of time hadn't been fully activated and could be activated again at any time. As for the other battle of time, it was needless to say. They hadn't used them yet after such a long rest. Chapter 3691. In the end, Long Huai held back his fury and handed over 25,000 battleships, fortresses, and a large number of resources of the same value. He was only able to pass the deal after that. He led the Senlon fleet through the main channel of the first universe to the source of all evil with a gloomy face. This time, he was really angry, but at the same time, he was also frightened. He had witnessed the terrifying power of the Time War Talisman twice in a row, and both times, the target had been destroyed. The first time, a total of 3 waves of golden tides were triggered. The first wave was 10,000 years, and the third wave was 30,000 years. In the end, even the Star-Lord of the second universe's colored Python clan could not withstand it. In just 3 breaths, only half of his bones were left. The second time, a single golden tide in the shape of a fan was enough to completely destroy Hongdou's Lifeng and the fortress with a diameter of 100,000 meters. It was definitely not a coincidence that both times were exactly the same. He thought of the other blood-colored Weeping Soul War Talisman, which had been activated twice. The first time, it could only destroy the souls of those below the Genesis realm, and the second time, not even a single Genesis realm expert could escape. The first time, it was obvious that it had been holding back. Therefore, Long Huai strongly suspected that the Golden Time War Talisman was probably hiding its strength the same way. 3 golden tides couldn't have been its limit. It would be horrifying if it could trigger 5 or even 6 waves in a row. Instantly killing Star Lords would be child's play. Even a region lord would be severely injured if not killed. Long Huai was shocked by such speculations, just like when he heard that Linghu's fortress was full of antimatter death ray cannons. He couldn't believe it. Previously, young Master Linghu had mastered the shocking starry sky black technology, but he had been banished to the turbulent void, which was a pity. But now, the demon race also had the equally powerful starry sky black technology in their hands. For Long Kuei, he had suffered a great loss this time. He was humiliated, but he was secretly overjoyed. He had already decided that after settling the matter of the source of all evil Starfield and returning to the headquarters of the Federation, he would definitely do his best to accomplish one thing, and that was to send troops to the demon race in the first universe at all costs. Moreover, the commander-in-chief had to be in his hands. Only this kind of terrifying black technology of the Great War of the Starry Sky could not fall into the hands of outsiders. With such expectations and a bellyful of resentment, Long Huai led the Sen Blue Fleet and quickly left the Devil Dweller Star region, heading swiftly in the direction of the First Universe's central region. At the same time, the immortal army of the Immortal Dynasty was gathering outside the large wormhole connected to the Third Universe at the front of the Demonkin Starfield. 2 days later, an immortal army of the same scale of 5 million warships headed towards the Demonkin Starfield. The one leading this immortal army was the Imperial Dynasty's Imperial Residence Elder, Long Ziwen. Previously, when this old fellow was overseeing the Death Starfield's Elder Sioux City, he had a dispute with Yi Xian. This time, when Yi Xian found out that the commander of this immortal army was him, he immediately sneered. Although he had the identity of Prince Xian after all, and it was not good for him to attack the immortal army, he could still make things difficult for this old fellow. At this moment, the 3 million warships sent by the demon race had already cut off the main starry sky route from the Demonkin Starfield to the First Universe's central region. And in front of the 3 million warships, there were no longer 5 warships, but 8 warships. In the morning, another 3 warships arrived from the Demon Emperor planet behind them. At this moment, they were mixed in between the 5 real warships. That's right, these 3 new warships were fake. They only had shells and power systems that could travel in the starry sky. However, the thousands of node beehives were simply empty shells, and the transmission pipes were also fake. However, the surface of the 3 warships was all painted with a camouflage coating. No matter if one scanned with spiritual power, divine sense or technology, they could not find any problems. The 3 fake warships were the fake Golden Time warship, the blood-red Weeping Soul warship, and the Grey Void warship. As for the other 4 fake warships, they were still working overtime on the Demon Emperor planet to build them. At this moment, the 5 million warships of the dynasty stopped in the void more than 10 million miles in front of the outer defense line of the Demon Emperor 3 stars. Seeing the 8 warships lined up in a row across the void, the face of Imperial Elder Long Ziwen turned green. He sucked in a cold breath. This scared me to death. The demon race actually has 8 warships? What that brat Mo Jinfeng said 2 days ago was actually true. Although this immortal army had only finished gathering and arrived here 2 days later, when the Sing Blue Fleet led by Long Huai had finished gathering and set off from the vicinity of the wormhole 3 days ago, the flagship fortress of Imperial Elder Long Ziwen had actually already passed through the wormhole and was near the wormhole. It was waiting for the follow-up fleet to assemble in the void. The same was true for the flagship of the 5 million warship army that represented the human cultivation camp. The overall commander in charge of the warship army of the cultivation camp was also Gong Xingtian, the vice palace master of Diju Palace, who was in charge of the observation fortress. 2 days ago, when the Sing Blue Fleet set off, Long Ziwen and Gong Xingtian both sent a scout fortress and activated the concealment array to follow behind them. Therefore, they knew everything that happened 2 days ago. After the news was sent back, Long Ziwen did not take it seriously. He thought that Mo Jinfeng was just boasting, but now he had a deeper understanding of his craziness. The tragic death of Hongdo Lifeng made him very vigilant. He had already secretly decided that he absolutely could not provoke this guy to go crazy. Yes. It was only 1% of the toll fee. It was only 50,000 warships or equivalent resources. It was not like the Immortal Dynasty could not afford it. There was no need to create more problems. Besides, the Sing Blue Fleet did not want to pay this toll fee. What was the result? After jumping around for a while, didn't they pay it in the end? They also lost a large fortress and a general. Most importantly, they lost a lot of face. Because of this, Long Ziwen had already made a decision before the immortal army under his command was fully assembled. It was only 50,000 warships. He would pay this toll fee without hesitation. The key was that he could not provoke that madman Mo Jinfeng. He had already made this decision. At this moment, when he saw that the demon race really had 8 warships, and among the 3 extra warships, 2 of them were the most terrifying blood-colored Weeping Soul warship and the Golden Time warship. Chapter 3692. Yi Xian was already thinking about how to make things difficult for Long Ziwen, but he didn't expect the other party to be so cowardly. Before he could shout, 25,000 battleships had already arrived. After approaching, they threw down the battleships. A large number of Dynasty's immortal army experts were inside, but they didn't say a word. Riding on a large number of small ships, they returned home. After receiving it, there was a large amount of various resources inside. The total value was exactly equivalent to 25,000 battleships of various types. Very obedient, there was no need for him to shout. Such a result made Devil Emperor Mo Wentian, Imperial Uncle Mo Qigong, and the others beam with joy. In just 2 days, they had obtained 50,000 battleships of various types, fortresses, and strongholds, as well as an equivalent amount of various resources. The key was that they didn't spend a single soldier. Last time, there were more or less some twists and turns, but this time, they didn't even have to shout a word, and they got the things in their hands. It was simply too good. They seemed to have vaguely seen the day when the entire devil race was overflowing with oil. Blocking the road and robbing was indeed extraordinary. This was definitely a supreme way to make a fortune. On this side, the higher-ups of the devil race were overjoyed, but Yi Xian was very depressed. He had already suppressed a stomach full of evil tricks, and had already thought about how to make things difficult for Long Ziwen. He didn't expect this old guy to be so cowardly. It was simply disappointing. However, this was also good. At least it set a good example for the Tenju Heavenly Palace and the other fleets of large and small forces behind, playing a good role. Even the immortal army of the Immortal Dynasty didn't say anything and obediently paid the toll. What else do they have to be reluctant about? If nothing unexpected happened, the subsequent toll would most likely be collected smoothly. The higher-ups of the devil race seemed to have seen this scene, and all of them were overjoyed. Soon, Yi Xian waved his hand and made the 3 million devil race fleet behind him give way to the Starry Sky main route to the First Universe Central Region. Although he was unhappy that he let Long Ziwen leave so easily, Long Ziwen had already paid the toll according to the rules and the standard he had set. Under these circumstances, if Yi Xian continued to make things difficult for them, then they would be breaking the rules and losing their integrity. If that happened, they would not be able to collect the toll fees in the future, which would add to their troubles. For the sake of the overall situation, he could only suppress the depression in his heart for the time being. Anyway, there would be plenty of opportunities to find fault with that old man Long Ziwen later. Don't forget, after this matter in the demon domain came to an end, Yi Xian still had to rush to the source of all evil domain. In that star area, he would appear as the ancient demon ape, an indigenous space beast in the core area of the source of all evil. At that time, if he wanted to trouble Long Ziwen, he wouldn't feel any pressure at all. Soon, the immortal army of 5 million battleships led by Long Ziwen passed through the Starry Sky main route of the First Universe Central Region of the Demon Domain and gradually went further away, rushing to the source of all evil near the Central Region. However, Yi Xian didn't leave just like that. Although the allied forces of the Second Universe and the Blue Fleet of the Wanluo Federation, as well as the immortal army of the human race's science and technology camp had already passed by, there was still another superforce behind them. It was the Tenju Heavenly Palace of the human race's cultivation camp. Right now, they were gathering at the front of the demon domain. The Tenju Heavenly Palace of the human race's cultivation camp was not to be trifled with. The supreme overlord of the cultivation camp had influence over half of the third universe, representing half of the entire human race's strength. They were also arrogant. The Starry Sky battleship army they had gathered was also 5 million battleships. They were extremely powerful, and their ambition and vision were relatively high. They were definitely a thorn in the side. When they encountered such a situation where they were blocked and robbed, they might not really give in and obediently pay the toll like that old coward Long Ziwen. Toll fees. Therefore, Yi Xian had to stay here and wait for the arrival of the Starry Sky battleship army of the Tenju Heavenly Palace. When this 5 million battleship army also sailed through the demon domain, he could basically put away the 4 battleships under his command and immediately set off for the source of all evil in the central region of the first universe. Although there were bound to be fleets of other forces coming later, such as the 3 empires under the control of the human race's science and technology camp's immortal army of the third universe, or some other small sects and alliances of the cultivation camp and so on. However, these small forces were not enough to cause any big waves. The few big heads at the front did not dare to act rashly. They themselves would think twice. Unless they had a screw loose in their heads, they would not dare to challenge the demonic Qi race. In fact, these small forces and sects might not even be able to gather a 5 million battleship army. Most of them were just a few million battleships. With this scale, the demon domain didn't need to rely on the terrifying power of the Starry Sky battleships to deter them. Just the 3 million battleship army behind the battleships was enough to make them obediently pay the toll fees. Soon, another 2 days passed in the blink of an eye. After the immortal army of the dynasty, the 5 million Starry Sky battleship army of the human cultivation camp finally finished gathering near the wormhole at the front of the demon domain. They immediately set off for the demon domain. The Starry Sky battleships of the human cultivation camp were slightly different from the ordinary technological battleships. They came in all kinds of shapes and sizes. Basically, they were more focused on the refinement of cultivation equipment rather than technological power. However, in general, Starry Sky battleships and technological battleships of the same size were about the same in terms of comprehensive combat power. At this time, this 5 million Starry Sky battleship army made up of all kinds of strange-looking Starry Sky battleships set off from the wormhole domain and stopped in the void more than 10 million kilometers away from the Demon Emperor 3 Stars defense line. The commander of this Starry Sky battleship army, the vice palace master of the Tenju Heavenly Palace, Gong Xingtian, already knew everything that had happened before. Originally, he was not very willing to pay 1% of the Starry Sky battleships or other resources of the same value. However, the previous precedents were right there, so he couldn't be conflicted. In the end, after Yi Xian shouted a few words, 25,000 Starry Sky battleships of all kinds and a batch of resources of the same value were sent over and stopped in the void near the Demon Emperor 3 Stars defense line. Yi Xian didn't make things difficult for these guys and immediately let them go. After the entire Starry Sky battleship army passed through the demon domain and went far away, Yi Xian came to the 25,000 Starry Sky battleships in front of him and looked at them with interest. Chapter 3693. The root of all evil was a planar-level space danger zone. In the first universe, it was known as the most dangerous place under the stars. The high-level commanders of the allied forces of the second universe had long been mentally prepared for its level of danger. They'd even found out about the basic situation of this star region, and they knew that all signals sent out by the supercomputers wouldn't be able to be transmitted once they entered this star region. At this moment, the 10 million-strong army of the various clans of the second universe had set up camp in the surrounding space outside the root of all evil. An army of over 10 million battleships stretched across the boundless space, and it was impossible to see the end of it. The higher-ups of the various clans were holding a meeting through the communication system of their respective flagship fortresses. The ones who presided over the meeting were still the 2 region lords who resided in the fleet, the Blood Wyrm clan's elder Zhao Kong and the Colored Python clan's elder Du Zhiting. The root of all evil is extremely vast, and it's divided into the core, the outer region, and the buffer zone between these 2 regions. These 3 regions. The Colored Python clan's elder Du Zhiting was explaining the situation of the root of all evil to all the other Star Lords and Universe Lords. There are only countless spatial rifts of various sizes in the outer region, and besides the spatial rifts in the buffer zone, some powerful ferocious beasts that are extremely rare in the outer universe have started to appear. As for the inner region, the ferocious beasts are even more powerful, and there are also some unknown dangers. It can be said that each of the 3 regions is more dangerous than the last. The scale of the 10 million battleships is enormous, and it's impossible for all of them to enter the root of all evil at the same time. Moreover, even the outer region of the star region is cut off from the outside world. The solution to this problem is for the 2 clans to send 2 fleets to guard the border between the 2 regions. They'll go and solve this problem. As for the communication between the battleships after entering the root of all evil, the communication between the battleships isn't affected. However, if special circumstances arise, The higher-ups of the various fleets can communicate with each other through their minds, and they can solve the problem. The biggest problem that's troubling us is the spatial rifts. There are no local ferocious beasts in the periphery, but there are a lot of mobile space rifts. An army of 10 million is too large. We have to build a safe and stable space channel. The plan will be carried out in 2 steps. First of all, the voracious wolf clan will send a fleet to explore the outer area of the origin of all evil and determine the best location to build a stable channel. Then, all the fortresses of the other clans will move together and activate the space closing device. They will slowly push forward and open a stable and safe channel to enter. The diameter of this passage is set to be around 1,000,000 kilometers. After all the other fleets enter, they must leave behind 1,000,000 ships to guard it, because there will definitely be fleets from other forces coming. Why should we allow them to enter freely when we opened up a stable passage? After that, the meeting ended. The greedy wolf race sent an exploration fleet consisting of 100 small fortresses, led by the race's universe master, Lang Feng, and rushed into the outer region of the root of all evil star region. Chila! As the exploration fleet entered the outer region of the root of all evil star region, their line of sight instantly darkened. The light source dimmed, and their visibility was reduced by more than half. At the same time, a very ear-piercing sound burst out. A huge void rift appeared in front of a small fortress, and it was still moving. The huge void rift was like a black saber, and it was slashing towards the small fortress's hull. This scene was too dangerous. The spatial rift was simply unstoppable. If one was hit by this spatial rift, they would definitely be split in 2. Even if it was a small fortress under such a heavy blow, it could not be used in a short period of time. Seeing this scene, the hair on Lang Feng's back stood up, and his eyes widened. He was completely stunned. Although he had been mentally prepared after the previous meeting, he was still shocked by the scene in front of him at this moment. How was this a normal cosmic void? It was like a broken bag full of holes. Countless spatial rifts of different sizes were densely packed in the void, and 1 or 2 would appear every once in a while. Those spatial rifts were obviously not fixed. They were slowly moving in some unknown pattern. Fortunately, they were not moving very fast, or this place would become a forbidden space that could not be stepped into. Even the old monsters beyond the universe state would have a hard time coming here. At this moment, the 100 small fortresses that had just entered the outer region were hovering in the void. They seemed to be safe, but in fact, they were not. Whether they moved forward, backward, up, or down, they would soon encounter other spatial rifts of different sizes. Even if they stayed there without moving, they would not be able to do so. That was because the spatial rifts in the void were slowly moving. Even if the corner of the void where a small fortress was located was safe for now, some spatial rifts would definitely move there after a long time. At that time, if they did not avoid them, they would only end up being cut in half. It was simply terrifying. No wonder it can be called a planar level space danger zone. This is clearly a void turbulence zone. The entire starfield is like this, full of large and small cracks, and they are still moving slowly. This is simply a star field level killing field. Any existence or matter that enters it, if they are not careful, they will be killed. They will be crushed to death. Lang Feng muttered to himself in a daze. After a long time, he came back to his senses. After pondering for a while, he issued orders to the other small exploration fortresses around him. All the ships spread out and maintained contact with each other. They advanced slowly all the way to complete this exploration mission as soon as possible and find a stable connection. The best location for the Tao. 1 day later, of the 100 small fortresses, there were only 87 left. However, they also spread out their lines of defense and slowly pushed all the way to the deepest part of the outer region. After crossing the front line, they would enter the central region buffer zone of the root of all evil star field. The order of the 2 old monsters was that after the exploration fleet reached here, they would enter the central region buffer zone and investigate the situation here before immediately retreating. Lang Feng was anxious to complete the mission, so he did not hesitate and immediately issued an order. All the remaining 87 small fortresses entered the buffer zone. Regardless of whether there was danger or not, they would stay for a short while and collect some images and data before immediately retreating, leaving the root of all evil star field. In the next moment, the visibility in his line of sight dimmed again. Immediately after, Lang Feng saw a scene that shocked him. As far as the eye could see, there were insects everywhere, densely packed insects. Chapter 3694. There were too many insects in their line of sight. Lang Feng and all the greedy wolf clan masters in the exploration team were stunned on the spot. Although their numbers were not enough to fill up the entire void to the point where there was no space for battleships to enter, their density was truly astonishing. In the entire buffer zone of the central region, there were not many large empty voids in the area where the insects were distributed. These insects were of different sizes. The small ones were hundreds of meters long, while the big ones were thousands of meters long. They were all beetles with hard shells, not soft-bodied reptiles. Its entire body was black, and its carapace was covered with a glossy luster. At first glance, it was obvious that it must be extremely hard. Moreover, its limbs and body had sharp barbs, as well as limb blades and so on. It belonged to the type of beetle that must have a very powerful combat strength. As for the aura, most of the black beetles were below the 8th realm, the black hole realm, but a few of them were above the black hole realm. Lang Feng's consciousness even caught a few black beetles in the 12th realm, the void realm, which were stronger than ordinary starry sky masters. This was a world of the insect race. Any human expert, even a universe realm master in the 15th realm, had to be careful. This was because this was only the edge of the buffer zone. If they entered the inner area, or even the depths of the entire root of all evil, there would be even more terrifying black beetles. There might even be universe realm insect kings and insect emperors. Fortunately, these black beetles did not seem to be very violent and aggressive. They should belong to a kind of insect race in the universe that was relatively inert. Otherwise, any creature that entered the root of all evil would have to face the beginning of a nightmare. In addition, all the insects basically did not move at all. Even if they moved, they only wandered around in a small area nearby. The dense and strange sound made people's scalp tingle. It was not the sound of eating or grinding teeth. Their limbs were crawling in the void and making some noise when they touched some cosmic dust. This meant that they did not have a high requirement for food, which happened to fit the characteristics of this kind of inert beetle. Damn the source of all evil. There are so many black beetles in the buffer zone of the central region. Although they are not very powerful, their numbers are too terrifying. I can't imagine what it will be like in the core region if I go further in. Lin Li muttered to himself. Muttering to himself, Lang Feng waved his hand and ordered, "Evacuate immediately. Our exploration mission has been completed. Now, the construction of a stable channel has nothing to do with us." During the evacuation, the exploration fleet sped up and rushed out of the outer area of the root of all evil in less than half a day. Then, Lang Yen reported the results of the exploration to the fleet commander and confirmed the best location to build a stable passage. The Spacemen device was different from the Space Oscillator device. It was more technologically advanced. The Space Oscillator was just a simple space oscillation effect. The greater the power, the wider the space it affected. Even a 3,000-meter fleet of regular stellar-level warships could be equipped with a small power oscillator. However, the space mending device required a small stronghold with a diameter of at least 50,000 meters to be equipped, which showed how high the level of the device was. This kind of device was originally created to repair some extremely unstable starfield voids in the universe, or some man-made small black holes. With a large number of space healing devices working together, even a small black hole could be slowly mended and gradually closed. The small star hole that Xianxia had created around the heavenly river star in the burial star region was then slowly repaired by a fleet sent by the upper echelons to activate the space healing device on the ship with a large number of strongholds. Otherwise, if it continued to expand, it would eventually devour a large part of the universe and fall into an irrecoverable situation. The reason why small and large strongholds were equipped with this kind of space healing device was that in the process of interstellar travel, the fleet sometimes had to pass through some dangerous areas with void rifts. In such a situation, if the area of the rift was not large and there was not much time, there was no need to take the risk and rush in. They could activate the space healing device to repair some void rifts and build a stable safe passage, then continue to move forward. Right now, this was exactly what the Allied forces of the Second Universe were doing. The entire army had more than 10 million battleships of various types. Although only the small strongholds with a diameter of 50,000 meters and the large strongholds with a diameter of 100,000 meters were equipped with a space healing device, the total number of these strongholds was close to 1 million, even though it was not yet 1 million. The nearly 1 million strongholds were arranged in several rows in a section of void with a diameter of 1 million miles. They were arranged in a high density and slowly moved into the domain of the source of all evil, leading the army of 10 million behind them to push forward. It could be seen that in front of these nearly 1 million strongholds, the void was trembling at an extremely high frequency. As the trembling continued, the spatial rifts of various sizes that were originally scattered throughout the void of the Milky Way began to close at a speed visible to the naked eye. Although the nearly 1 million strongholds were moving slowly, they did not stop and continued to move forward. Void rifts could be seen in front of them from time to time, but as long as they were moving through the void, the path behind them was smooth, and all the space rifts disappeared. This kind of small space rift did not consume much time and energy to repair. Behind the nearly 1 million strongholds, the tens of millions of battleships of various types easily entered. They no longer had to worry about the space rifts. In just half a day, this huge fleet of battleships had reached a total of more than 10 million. Except for the 1 million army composed of the Blood Flood Dragon clan, the Cyan Rock clan, and the Battle Lion clan, which stayed outside the domain of the source of all evil to guard the entrance of the passage, the rest of the battleships were left behind. All the battleships had entered the peripheral area of this star field. Another day passed, and a smooth passage with a diameter of 1 million miles, from the entrance of the peripheral area to the boundary of the buffer zone in the depths, was finally completed. In this area with a diameter of 1 million miles, not even a single void rift could be seen. This corner of the peripheral area of the source of all evil, a planar-level starfield, had been completely transformed into a smooth passage. This was simply a miracle, but if it were not for the army of 10 million battleships or the army of 1 million strongholds, it would not have been possible to complete this task. In front of them was the boundary between the buffer zone and the peripheral area of the source of all evil starfield. Chapter 3695. Rumble. Boom! Shill! The sound of explosions rang out in an instant, accompanied by the sharp sound of the energy light beams of the battleship cannons shooting out. They were as dense as rain, echoing endlessly in this void space. The 10 million battleship army of the Second Universe's various races had crossed the boundary between the outer area of the source of all evil star region and the buffer zone of the central region, entering this buffer zone filled with countless black beetles. In front of them was still the nearly 1 million large and small fortresses. They were still using the space compaction device, divided into several rows, spreading out on the star path with a diameter of 1 million miles, slowly advancing forward. While repairing and healing the void cracks in front of them, these nearly 1 million large and small fortresses also attacked from time to time, shooting out energy light beams of battleship cannons, sweeping away the black beetles in the void space ahead. Following closely behind these nearly 1 million large and small fortresses, the army of 10 million large and small troops fired indiscriminately. Countless cannon muzzles pointed at the left and right sides of this million-mile-wide path from different angles. Screech! Screech! The countless black beetles that were hibernating in the void space instantly became restless. A large number of black beetles' huge bodies were blasted apart by the energy light beams of the battleship cannons, and milky white body fluids with a hint of green sputtered endlessly. This entire vast void space was filled with a foul stench. A foul smell turned into the limitless ghost prison. Although the number of black beetles in the buffer zone of the central region was terrifying and uncountable, their strength was still too weak after all. The strongest was only the 12th realm, the Void Realm. In the face of such an army of 10 million battleships, there was no resistance at all. The army advanced all the way, almost unhindered, and all the black beetles that could be seen along the way were all eliminated. This entire void space was filled with countless black beetle corpses, and insect body fluid sputtered from these broken corpses. It was extremely disgusting. A day later, when the entire army of 10 million approached the boundary between the buffer zone of the central region and the core hinterland of the source of all evil, a sudden change occurred. At this point, there were very few black beetles, so the army of 10 million at the back had basically stopped attacking, and the void space had long quieted down. It was also at this time that a strange buzzing sound suddenly came from the void in front of them, which was originally extremely quiet with only a few faint and dense rustling sounds. It continued without end, similar to the feeling after the space oscillator was activated. Ripples appeared in the void, causing one's scalp to tighten inexplicably, and a bad feeling arose in the bottom of their hearts. As this sudden buzzing sound rang out, the few black beetles in the void ahead suddenly charged forward, crossing the dividing line and entering the core of the root of all evil. The same thing was happening in the void on both sides. It was as if something was happening in the central hinterland that attracted all the black beetles in the buffer zone of the central domain. Seeing this scene, the commander of the fleet, the Blood Wyrm clan's elder, Jiao Kong, immediately ordered, "Build the tunnel at full speed and end the last part of the void as soon as possible. After that, the entire army will advance into the core area." After the order was given, The nearly 1 million fortresses in the front immediately turned the power of the space oscillator to the maximum, and they advanced much faster. The boundary between the core hinterland and this buffer zone could already be seen in the distance. At this moment, the entire army was advancing at full speed. In just 4 hours, the nearly 1 million fortresses in front were the first to enter the core hinterland of the root of all evil. Then, the army of 10 million followed closely behind. After entering the central hinterland, the number of void rifts decreased by more than half, and the black beetles that were densely packed had almost disappeared. Although the entire central hinterland was darker, it was much quieter and quieter. However, 1 or 2 strange auras that flashed by occasionally were clearly extremely powerful. They were at least at the 13th level of the Genesis realm or above. Even the auras of the 15th level of the Jianghu realm were not rare. At this moment, in a void about 4 to 5,000 miles ahead, there was a continuous but not very noisy buzzing sound coming from it. Along with a series of buzzing sounds, there seemed to be 5 extremely powerful auras mixed within. The buzzing was clearly the unique biological frequency of the Black Beetle clan. Right now, the invisible biological frequency radiated from the void ahead. The large number of black beetles in the surrounding void suddenly changed their lazy nature and all crawled in the void, gradually squeezing together. In the blink of an eye, the sea of black beetles gradually began to wriggle forward, like waves in the ocean, pushing forward. In the blink of an eye, they had traveled hundreds of miles. That direction was exactly where the nest of the Star-Lord Black Beetle Mother was located. At the same time, some other kinds of star beasts also began to appear in the void in front of them. At first, there were only 1 or 2 of them, but soon, more and more space beasts appeared in the void. Judging from their auras, they were all above the 13th level of the Genesis realm. However, they were just small fries who didn't dare to get too close. They simply observed from afar. The space beasts that dared to approach were all at least in the 15th level of the cosmos state. After only an hour or so, Xianxia had seen at least 100 of them. Among them was the inferior bloodhorn dragon that Xianxia had seen the last time he came. The aura around its body had actually reached the late stage of the 15th Great Realm, the Universe Realm, and was incomparably powerful. Even the cosmos state beasts weren't the strongest among the local beasts. There were too many space beasts in different shapes and sizes, but all of them were extremely strong. In the distance to the right, there was clearly a star beast that looked somewhat similar to a qilin, but was entirely green in color. It was rumbling toward them. The ferocious beast wasn't very large. It was only 1,000 meters long, smaller than most universe-state ferocious beasts. It looked lazy, as if it were sleeping in the void, but it was actually moving at a high speed. It was releasing the aura of a mid-star lord. On the other side of the void, a human-shaped beast appeared. It was 10,000 meters tall and had mouths all over its body. It was exactly the many-mouthed beast that Xianxia had seen last time. It was also a Star Lord and was in the advanced phase. Chapter 3696. After passing through the boundary between the Central Region's buffer zone and the core of the origin of all evil and entering the core area, the Allied army of the Second Universe immediately stopped at the inner side of the boundary. The scene that was occurring in the space 5 million kilometers ahead was truly too strange. Moreover, not only were there many types of native ferocious beasts in the core area, their cultivations were extremely formidable as well. It was even to the extent that there were a few dozen Star-Lords and great figures in the universe. There were over 100 of them. Even in the entire Allied army of the Second Universe that had 10 million battleships, there were only a few dozen Star-Lords. Even though there were a few more great figures in the universe, there were only a few hundred of them. Even though such a high-level combat force seemed to have surpassed the group of native ferocious beasts that could be seen from afar, this was merely the edge of the core area, and the area that could be seen was merely a corner of the core area. So many great figures had appeared in just a corner of space, so it was obvious how terrifying the overall strength of the native ferocious beasts in the core area was. Even Zhao Kong and Du Jiting, who were region lords, didn't dare act rashly. So they immediately gave the order for the entire fleet to stop temporarily and understand the situation up ahead. They wanted to see exactly what was happening there before making a decision. An army of 10 million battleships spread out on the inner side of the boundary, and they continued for a distance of 5 million kilometers. All of them lay dormant and didn't dare make any sudden movements. Inside the battleship, the elites from the various races of the Second Universe were even more nervous. This star area, the source of all evil, was indeed a planar danger zone. Along the way, everything they had seen had shocked them to the core. At this moment, only the few hundred almighty figures, a few dozen Star-Lords, and the two region lords, Jiao Kong and Du Jiting, had released their consciousnesses and carefully extended their consciousnesses towards the expanse of space that was 5,000 kilometers ahead of them to investigate everything that was occurring there. In next to no time, all the great figures and Star Lords revealed shocked expressions. Even Jiao Kong and Du Jiting had a wisp of astonishment flashed through their faces. The scene they saw from their investigation had really exceeded everyone's expectations. A bloody struggle between the higher-ups of the insect race was actually unfolding there. Outside of the nests where the insectoid queen resided, there were 5 powerful high-grade black beetles in 5 different directions in the void. Their cultivation bases were all at the peak of the universe realm level 9. This was originally nothing much, but at this moment, these 5 universe realm black beetle kings were clearly engaged in a bloody battle, devouring each other. The strange buzzing sound that had come from this core area had been emitted by these 5 black beetle kings. This was a special summoning signal of the black beetle race. Other than the black beetles that belonged to this race, the other ferocious beasts that lived in this core would also be summoned or invited to witness the birth of this race's new queen. That's right, this was a battle for supremacy. The black beetle queen from before had already fallen. The new queen would be born from the 5 black beetle kings with a cultivation base of Great Circle of Universe Realm 9. The battle between the 4 black beetle kings wasn't as simple as a winner. It was because the peak of the universe realm wasn't enough to become a queen. One had to reach the 16th level and become a Star Lord to be qualified. It was also because of this that this battle for supremacy was destined to be incomparably bloody. Because of this, the 5 black beetle kings with cultivation base at the pinnacle of universe rank 9 were fighting each other by devouring each other. There was only one outcome. The other 4 black beetle kings would be devoured. Their flesh and cultivation would be turned into resources for the final black beetle king, which would help it make a breakthrough and become a Star Lord. As for the birth of a new generation of Supreme Queen Mother, only then would it be considered the birth of a new generation of Supreme Queen Mother. That was how all the previous black beetle queens were born. It was a life-and-death ordeal for any black beetle king that participated in the battle. The battle was sacred for the entire black beetle race. Even the black beetle king that was devoured in the end would still be a hero of the race. Therefore, every time the black beetle race competed in such a bloody way to become the new queen of the black beetle race, the black beetle kings that participated in the battle would send out unique biological frequencies to summon their race and invite the ferocious beasts of other races that were also living in the central area. The experts would all come to watch the battle. That was why no ferocious beasts paid any attention to the arrival of the coalition army of the second universe. That included the 5 black beetle kings, who were already aware that they were massacring countless black beetles in the central region's buffer zone. As a matter of fact, such a large scale of invaders wouldn't have been allowed to enter the central area at all. All the local ferocious beasts that lived in the central area would have resisted them until they were driven away. However, at that moment, all the local ferocious beasts except for the black beetle race had already noticed the enormous fleet of invaders, but none of them paid any attention to it for the time being. That was because the birth of the queen of any ferocious beast race in this galaxy was extremely sacred, especially the black beetle race. Because this race's reproductive ability was too shocking, and their numbers were terrifying, the central region's buffer zone outside the central area was left to countless low-level black beetle race to guard. Right now, the new queen of the black beetle race was about to be born, and the other local ferocious beasts had come to watch the battle out of respect. Naturally, they wouldn't act at such a time and start a massacre. That would be ignoring the queen of the race that was about to be born, and it was a great taboo in this galaxy. However, after the bloody battle of the queen of the bug race was over, other than the newly born black beetle queen, the other local ferocious beasts wouldn't just sit by and watch. All the ferocious beasts would charge toward the enormous fleet of invaders in the distant void. However, all this was only known to the local ferocious beasts. As for the powerhouses of the Second Universe's coalition army, who were watching the battle of the queen of the bug race from a distance of more than 10 million miles in the void, they were completely unaware and didn't realize that a crisis was about to befall them. Just as the queen of the bug race was about to end. Screech! Screech! Chapter 3697. Screech! 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 For frenzied howls filled the entire void, filled with joy and grief. They were happy because the 4 black beetle kings had devoured a king of their own and obtained a lot of flesh and blood, which had significantly improved their strength. They were very close to the Star-Lord state at the moment. They could definitely be considered half a Star-Lord. As for grief, it was because the one that had been devoured was one of their own kind. It was even possible that they had been good friends before the war. That was why the 4 surviving Black Beetle Kings were grieving over its death. This kind of grief could not help but lament about the final outcome that they might face in the future. This was because among them, not long after, there would be 3 who would meet the same end. They would be devoured, and in the end, only one would remain and become the queen mother of the clan. The 4 Black Beetle Kings whose power had soared fought again amidst the shrieks. They didn't even use any of the unique bloodline techniques of their kind, because it was completely unnecessary. In this kind of battle between queen mothers, it was destined that only one Bug King would remain. As for the others, they couldn't just admit defeat. They had to die and be devoured. Therefore, the battle between the Insect Kings was a bloody brawl from the beginning to the end. Moreover, during such a brawl, one could occasionally see an Insect King opening its mouth and devouring the flesh and blood of its companions. It was like raising a cup. Crack! Crack! 2 crisp sounds rang out as the 4 Black Beetle Kings fought in pairs. 2 of them were careless and had one of their legs swallowed by the other. Gray-green body fluid splashed in the air. Amidst the clear chewing sounds that made one's scalp tingle, the 2 Black Beetle Kings that had successfully bitten off a large chunk of their opponent's flesh instantly rushed out. They opened their wide mouths and extended their long red tongues, sucking in the grayish-green body fluids that splashed out from their opponent's body in the air. To them, these body fluids were extremely nutritious. In fact, even to the 2 injured Black Beetle Kings, the grayish-green body fluid that splashed out from their bodies was extremely precious. Thus, an even more horrifying scene appeared. The 2 Black Beetle Kings that were missing a part of their bodies actually rushed over after letting out a cry in unison. They fought over the grayish-green body fluid that had sputtered out of the void. The body fluid that had just gushed out from their bodies. Everything was for the sake of the clan's prosperity. In this kind of battle for supremacy among the Queen Mothers, any Black Beetle King would do their best. No matter how good their relationship was before the battle, they would not go easy. In the end, the clan would give birth to an unworthy Queen Mother. In order to prevent that from happening, the wounded Black Beetle Kings could even devour their own flesh and blood and fight for the splashing gray and green body fluids. This scene shocked all the universe gods and star lords in the allied forces of the Second Universe. Even Jiao Kong and Du Jiting, the 2 old monsters who were domain lords, were a little moved. Among the large races of the Second Universe, the internal competition was also extremely tragic. These old monsters had seen too much and were already numb to it. Which of them hadn't stained their hands with the blood of their own race or even their peers? But all of that was really nothing when compared to the scene that was unfolding before his eyes. How many people would not hesitate to devour the flesh and blood that splashed from their own bodies in the midst of a battle for supremacy within their own race? Just for the sake of preserving their vitality and combat strength as much as possible so that this battle for supremacy would be as high as possible? Facing all of this, not only were the high-level experts of the Second Universe shocked, but even the large number of native ferocious beasts who were watching the battle in the void around the Queen's nest gradually showed sorrow in their eyes. The aura emitted from their bodies became more and more dignified, cold, and iron-blooded. This coldness and iron-blooded was directed at the huge fleet of foreign invaders that was still watching in the distant void at this moment. For all the native ferocious beast clans that lived in this region of stars, they had always been lying dormant here for countless years, and they hadn't taken a single step out of the core of the root of all evil because the enormous netherworld furnace in the depths of this region of stars would occasionally emanate the aura of the source of their bloodlines. They were unwilling to leave and regarded this place as the source of their bloodline. In order to protect this place, every ferocious beast race didn't hesitate to use the cruelest methods to maintain the exuberant vitality and strong survival ability of their race. Only in this way could they guard this holy land and not be trampled by foreign forces. It could be said that the bloody battle for supremacy between the 5 universe realm insect kings of the Black Beetle race that was happening in front of them was actually the huge fleet of foreign invaders that was watching in the distant void not far away. This fleet might just be a representation of a crisis. But now they had appeared at this moment, when the Black Beetle race had no choice but to launch a fierce battle for supremacy within their race in order to survive and protect the source of their bloodline. Then, they were destined to bear the wrath of the entire Black Beetle race and all the other native ferocious beasts that had come to watch the ceremony. Screech! Screech! 2 incomparably shrill cries rang out, and the battle near the Mother Queen's nest star entered a new stage. Of the 4 Black Beetle Kings that were fighting in pairs, 2 finally lost their lives, their heads eaten by their opponents and swallowed into their stomachs. Now, out of the 5 Black Beetle Kings, only 2 were left. However, these 2 Black Beetle Kings didn't immediately start killing each other. As if they had a tacit understanding, They tacitly stopped fighting for supremacy and focused on devouring the remains of their respective opponents after their deaths. Even if the Black Beetle Kings of the same size crazily devoured the corpses of the two gigantic Black Beetle Kings that were 10,000 feet tall, it was obvious that they couldn't completely devour them in a short time. This lasted for a few minutes, and in the end, the corpses of the two defeated Black Beetle Kings were completely devoured. As for the last two surviving Black Beetle Kings, because they had obtained such a plentiful supply of flesh and blood, the cultivation aura in their bodies rapidly rose at a speed visible to the naked eye. Rumble. Boom! An incomparably majestic energy aura surged endlessly, and the void around the two Black Beetle Kings was stirred by this terrifying aura, causing a faint rumbling sound to be heard. Then, before all the powerhouses of the various races in the second universe and a large number of native ferocious beasts could recover from their shock, an even more powerful terrifying aura gushed out from the two Black Beetle Kings at the same time, which could be said to be as vast as the sea. The aura of a Star-Lord old monster. A new Black Beetle Queen was born. Chapter 3698. Hum. Hum. Strange buzzing sounds echoed. All the Black Beetles watching the battle around the Mother Queen's nest star were so excited that they started to tremble. They cheered excitedly. There was only one standard for the contest, which was that all the Black Beetle Kings would fight and devour each other until a Star-Lord Black Beetle Queen emerged. That Black Beetle Queen would be the new queen of the race. In the past Queen Mother Wars, new Queen Mothers were born, but there were also cases where the Black Beetle Kings that participated in the wars survived. More often than not, all the Black Beetle Kings were consumed, and only one Black Beetle Queen was left. Even when there was only one Black Beetle King left, the Queen hadn't been born yet, because the last Black Beetle King hadn't reached the Star-Lord state yet. However, a situation like this, where two Black Beetle Emperors appeared at the same time, had never happened before. To the entire race, it was no longer important which of the two Black Beetle Queens would become the new Queen Mother, or both of them at the same time. What mattered was that the bloody conflicts within the race, which they had always disliked, could finally be stopped, because two new Queens had been born. Screech! Screech! The two Black Beetle Queens raised their heads and roared at the same time. The pure aura of the Star-Lord state surged out of their bodies, but they weren't directed at each other. They were both moving towards the edge of the core heartland, where the coalition army of the second universe was. All the native beasts around the mother's nest also turned their heads and looked at them. The new queen of the Black Beetles had been born, and the contest was over. It was time to expel the invaders. Screech! The many-mouthed beast, which had a humanoid shape and was tens of thousands of feet tall with mouths all over its body, raised its head and let out a furious roar. Black mist gushed out from the wide mouths that covered its entire body, and it rushed over in a flash, covering a distance of more than 100 miles in a single step. Besides that, the indigenous ferocious beast that looked similar to a Qilin but was completely dark green followed closely behind. Blood-colored mist surged around its body, and lightning could faintly be seen exploding. Its aura was terrifying to the extreme as it charged over as well. Both of them were Star-Lords, and they weren't the only ones. There were dozens of native beasts with similar vibes. Behind the dozens of Star-Lords was a group of more than 100 grand experts. Among them, the 1,000 Zhonglong sub-blood dragon was in the lead and was roaring furiously. More than 100 universe grand cultivators and Star-Lords attacked at the same time. In the blink of an eye, they formed a magnificent pressure that covered the sky and the earth. Behind them were a large number of native beasts that were below the universe realm. They formed an army of beasts, rolling toward the millions of battleships of the allied forces of the second universe. All of this happened too suddenly. All the native ferocious beasts had been quietly watching the battle of the Black Beetle race's Queen Mother in the void a moment ago, but now they had all rushed over at the same time in the blink of an eye. Everyone was caught unprepared. The countless experts of the various fleets in the army were all shocked. His expression changed. Humph! You're asking to be killed. Counterattack immediately. They're just a few dozen Star-Lords. How dare they be so arrogant? They don't know what's good for them. Since the native beasts here aren't friendly, there's no need to hesitate. Kill them all. The two old monsters who were commanding the entire army expressed their stance as soon as possible. Their tone was extremely cold, without the slightest hint of panic. Just a few dozen Star-Lords weren't enough to make them take them seriously. Any single region lord was capable of crushing a few dozen Star-Lord realm old geezers by themselves. Besides, there were dozens of Star-Lords in the army of the second universe too. As for the universe realm experts, There were even more of them. This time, there were hundreds of Universe Realm experts following the army. They would be the backbone of the high-grade battle force. At this moment, all the Universal experts and Star-Lords had basically rushed out of their respective flagship fortresses. They roared and activated their bloodline, manifesting their bloodline true forms, and roared at the countless native beasts that were lunging at them from the opposite side of the void. At the same time, the 10 million warships that had set up a defensive perimeter rumbled in unison and fired their cannons, locking onto the native ferals that were lunging at them. Beams after beams of cannons blanketed the world as they rained down. There was no doubt that the scales of victory had already tilted towards the coalition army of the Second Universe before the battle even began. Both sides of the battle had almost the same number of Star-Lords, but in terms of Grand Experts, the coalition army of the Second Universe had an advantage. Below the Grand Experts, the coalition army of the Second Universe had 10 million warships. Although the native beasts in the opposite void were also huge, it was impossible to fight against 10 million. It was obviously a joke to fight against an army of warships. Even the two old monsters of the Domain Lords who were overseeing the coalition army of 10 million didn't intend to make a move. Because there was no need to do so at all. With just this level of power, there was no need for them to take action at all. A fierce battle soon appeared, and the void was dyed red with blood. The huge bodies of the indigenous ferocious beasts were either torn apart by the Universe Masters and Star-Lords of the various races of the Second Universe, who had also revealed their bloodline true bodies, or by the cannons of the tens of thousands of battleships behind them. The energy beams were shattered. Furious roars, miserable howls, and screams resounded in the void. In the blood-stained world, countless energy beams of various sizes were intertwined with each other, rendering the strange scene of blood and fire extremely dazzling. The battle continued. Every minute and every second, native beasts bled and died. Similarly, there were casualties on the side of the coalition army of the Second Universe. There were even some old monsters of the Star-Lords who rushed to the defense line formed by the 10 million warships and used their bloodline divine abilities. Often, a huge energy claw slammed down. Immediately, a warship turned into a huge fireball that exploded. However, it wasn't of much use. The coalition army was too large. There were more than 10 million warships of all kinds. Even though some warships were damaged in the battle every moment, or even completely destroyed, exploding into a huge fireball, they died together with the experts of the Second Universe inside the warships. They were reduced to ashes. However, it didn't affect the overall situation at all. The steel defense line formed by the 10 million warships was unshakable. It didn't shake at all. Chapter 3699. Thousands of warships were attacking, and countless cannons were bombarding each other. The devastation of this battle had never been seen before in history. Although the number of native ferocious beasts in the core of the origin of all evil was enormous, and after the great battle in the Black-Armored Mother's Star Nest began, the native ferocious beasts from other directions also rushed over one after another. They had indeed organized several waves of attacks with astonishing might. In the meantime, the Grand Cultivators and Star-Lords of various races in the Second Universe who had rushed out of their warships to fight were all forced to retreat. Later on, more than 20 Grand Cultivators and 4 Star-Lords of various races had perished. However, in the end, the waves of attacks of the local ferocious beasts were all repelled by the bombardment of the Qianquan experts and the Star-Lords in the front and the countless cannons of the warships behind. Not only had they been repelled, countless corpses had been left behind in that corner of the void. There were many native beasts, but they were no match for an army of 10 million warships. One of the 2 Black Beetle Emperors that had just become emperors had already perished. The other one was heavily wounded and wouldn't be able to persist much longer. The advanced Star-Lord humanoid monster, which was as large as a small planet, had one of its arms torn off by the 2 Star-Lords of the Second Universe during the battle. Its other leg was then hit by an antimatter beam of light with a diameter of 30,000 meters. It fell. As for the unicorn, the beast that had been in the middle phase of the Star-Lord state, had already turned into a lifeless corpse. The lower half of its body had been completely blown apart. It was brutal. It couldn't have been more brutal. Such a fierce battle continued for another half a day. After a whole day and night, the edge of the root of all evil starfield was finally cleared. The void was filled with the remains of the native beasts of this starfield. They covered the sky and covered the earth, filling the line of sight. All of them had lost their life force, and not a single one was still alive. As for the last Black Beetle Emperor and the advanced Star-Lord humanoid monster, they retreated to the core area with the last surviving native beasts. There had been more than 10 million native beasts in that area, but only 1 million had escaped. Among them, there were no more than 20 experts and no more than 10 Star Lords. At the same time, the army of the Second Universe suffered a lot of losses too. Thousands of warships exploded into fireballs and were completely annihilated. Some of the experts and Star Lords had perished too. It was safe to say that all the races of the Second Universe had suffered a great loss in that battle. Every expert and Star Lord was a precious treasure for any race. However, all the sacrifices were worth it for the sake of the good fortune in the source of all evil. It was also at this moment that when the core hinterland was completely wiped out, the cold and emotionless voices of the two domain lord old monsters, Jiao Kong and Du Jiting, rang out at the right time. Let's regroup and move on. Our final destination is the deepest part of the core area up ahead. It's not far away. Hearing these words, the countless experts in the entire Second Universe's 10 million battleships trembled violently, and a fanatical expression appeared on their faces. Regarding this time, the higher-ups of various races in the Second Universe suddenly issued a war order to invade the First Universe. In the entire army, except for the existence of Universe God, no one knew why. It was only when the army arrived at the root of all evil star domain that the middle and low-level experts of various races vaguely realized the true purpose of this expedition. It was probably not as simple as a crusade against the Heaven's Legacy race. Otherwise, they would not have gone to Heaven's Legacy City, but instead to the Heaven's Legacy star domain, which was known as the First Universe's most dangerous star domain. Why would the source of all evil come here? When the army advanced all the way to the core area of the source of all evil and saw the countless powerful native beasts in that area, they basically understood the reason. There had to be some benefits in the depths of that area that could tempt the core leaders of the Second Universe. They were willing to launch a plane-level space war just to get what they wanted. However, it was just a guess after all. Nobody dared to ask. But now when Jiao Kong and Du Jiting, the two old monsters in charge of the army, personally said this, everyone was finally sure. Then they were ecstatic. The races of the Second Universe were originally all kinds of ferocious beasts with primordial creatures flowing in their bodies. They were warlike and violent by nature. They might not be interested in a normal war, but this kind of war for the sake of seizing good fortune was the most delightful in the eyes of the experts of the Second Universe. Welcome. The higher-ups ate meat, and the lower-level experts could at least drink some soup. The good fortune in this source of all evil starfield was so astonishing that it even attracted all the races in the Second Universe to gather an army of millions to fight for it. It was simply unimaginable. At this moment, after confirming this point, the experts of the various races in the army of millions were all shouting excitedly as if they had been injected with chicken blood. The army of millions was quickly organized, and then they couldn't wait to move forward again. They didn't even have the mood to collect the flesh and blood materials in the corpses of the native beasts that filled the void. Compared to the good fortune in the depths of this star field, the corpses of these powerful native beasts had lost the attraction it should have had. Soon, the huge army of millions advanced all the way, crossing the border area and finally entering the depths of the core hinterland. In the void in front of them, there was also a large number of space beasts. It was the same scene as before. The only difference was that these space beasts were all dead. Their bodies were huge, and they had all revealed their bloodline true bodies. They were just lying in the dark void in front of them, and most of them were incomplete. In the distance, one could even see an ancient demon ape. Its aura was powerful, and its bloodline true body was hundreds of thousands of feet tall, but at this moment, it was lying in the void. Among the 3 different ape bodies, the black body of flesh and blood had no head, and most of its body was incomplete. Golden ape blood still flowed, emitting a strong ancient aura. As for the other 2 bodies, the skeleton body was almost completely broken, and only the head still hung on its shoulder. As for the black mist-like illusory body, it had already dissipated. Further away, a silver dragon came into sight. Only the back half of its body was left. The front half, including the dragon's head, was all gone. Looking further ahead, one could even see a gigantic true phoenix. Although it had also fallen, its body was still burning with phoenix flames, and it also exuded a strong aura of desolation. Chapter 3700. After a brief moment of silence, this army of 10 million immediately burst into an uproar. Excited discussions rang out from the fleets of the various races in the Second Universe, reverberating endlessly. The entire void was boiling because of this. Heavens, what did I just see? That demon ape has 3 heads and 6 arms, and its bloodline true body is hundreds of thousands of feet long. Its aura is extremely powerful, like a small star. What kind of existence is that? Ancient demon ape. It must be the ancient demon ape. Legend has it that it went extinct long ago in the primordial era. In every generation of this race, only one demon ape is born. Bloodline inheritance is too difficult. What is this? Didn't you see the remains of that silver dragon? That is definitely a creature from the primordial era. Every drop of silver dragon blood, every inch of silver dragon flesh, is a supreme treasure. How many years has it been since it died? Half of its body is still shining with the light of treasures, and the blood of the silver dragon is still flowing. Just by collecting a little, today's trip was not in vain. And that giant flame bird that seems to be a true phoenix. Its aura seems to be even more powerful, and it lies even further away in the void. Even though it has died countless years ago, its body is still emitting mysterious flames. That must be the true phoenix fire. I'm afraid even a small wisp of it is a supreme treasure for refining weapons. We've earned big. We've really earned big this time. This core starfield, the source of all evil, is actually an ancient battlefield that has been sealed since the primordial era until now. There are supreme treasures of blood and flesh that are hard to find in the world. Just what we can see now, once we collect them all, it will be enough to shock the world. Haven't you noticed? This is only the starting point of the core hinterland. There is an even deeper and more distant void ahead. The further the remains of the primordial era creatures are, the stronger their auras are, and the more precious their bloodlines are. That's right. There's no doubt about that. When we reach the true end, there will definitely be great fortunes that we can't even imagine. This time, our allied army of tens of millions is going to return with a full load. It's definitely a bountiful harvest that has never been seen before. As the mid-level and low-level experts in the various fleets exclaimed, the commanders of the various fleets, the existences above the universe realm, fell into silence. They seemed to be in low spirits and seemed to be worried. Without reaching this level, what one could see was only the surface. Only those whose cultivation base had reached the universe realm and above would be able to acutely capture the formless pressure in the depths of the hinterland in front of them through the distant void. Yes, the remains of the primordial creatures that could be seen in the distance were all supreme treasures. Even if it was only the remains of the silver dragon or the remains of the true phoenix that could be seen in the distance and brought back to the second universe, it would definitely mean a rare harvest for any race. The flesh and blood of this type of existence were too precious. Every drop of precious blood, every inch of precious flesh, were all supreme refinement treasures. Using them, one could refine heaven-defying great medicines. This was just the beginning of the core of the hinterland. There was no doubt that in the deeper void, there would be even more powerful remains of primordial creatures. Jiao Kong and Du Jiting, the two old monsters of the Blood Dragon clan and the Colored Python clan, even clearly knew that at the end of the void, there was a void refining array. The materials used to make that void refining array were all the remains of powerful primordial creatures, and the final product was the legendary all-evil origin liquid that was almost as effective as the chaos spiritual liquid. Even the bloodline ancestors of the various races in the second universe could only get 1 or 2 drops of it every year. Compared to the void refining array and its final product, the remains of the silver dragon and the true phoenix that could be seen in their line of sight were not trash in the eyes of Jiao Kong and Du Jiting, but in fact, they were not that far from it. However, it was also because of this that the core higher-ups of the various races in the second universe, led by Jiao Kong and Du Jiting, were so worried. Their faces were full of unwillingness and worry. The feeling of seeing a treasure mountain but not being able to get it was torture. They could already feel the suffocating pressure from the remains of the silver dragons and true phoenixes. In the void in front of them, there were many remains of powerful primordial creatures, and each of them emitted a mysterious primordial aura. When gathered together, it was definitely a terrifying force. Just the void in front of them was already difficult for the army of 10 million battleships behind them to pass through. Facing the invisible and terrifying pressure in the void, all the battleships below the 10,000-meter-tall fortress would be destroyed. Only the battleships above the 10,000-meter-tall fortress could barely withstand it. However, this was just the beginning. The deeper they went, the more powerful the remains of primordial creatures in the void would be, and the more terrifying the invisible pressure they emitted would be. There was one thing that could be confirmed. That was, the battleships behind them would only be able to endure until they reached the deepest part and saw the enormous void refining array. Only a small portion of the nearly 1 million fortresses that had opened the path for the army of 10 million could see it. In other words, around 300,000 fortresses with diameters of 100,000 meter wide. Even a small fortress with a diameter of 50,000 meter wide would absolutely be unable to endure until they reached the deepest part, and they would be destroyed on the way. Moreover, this was merely the battleships. If they didn't have the protection of the energy shields and the cabin pressure of the battleships, then the experts of the various clans of the second universe who'd come with the army would be even more fragile. Not to mention reaching the deepest part of the void refining array. Merely the void in front of them was something that existences below the 13th level of the Genesis realm would absolutely be unable to traverse with their bodies, and they would be crushed by the invisible pressure that suffused the void, causing them to explode and perish. Even Jiao Kong and Du Jiting, who were region lords and commanded an army of 10 million, hadn't expected such a situation at all. They'd obtained some information about the void refining array from their clans, but they weren't aware that such a terrifying and invisible pressure would actually suffuse the path to the Grand Formation. If this problem wasn't resolved, then their objective of taking complete control of the void refining array would be nothing but empty talk. There's definitely some sort of special method to avoid the terrifying pressure that suffuses the void. Jiao Kong muttered with a gloomy expression on his face, and he continued unwillingly. Otherwise, how could those native ferocious beasts who fled into the void ahead have passed through this area? They don't have the protection of the energy shields and cabin pressure of the battleships, so they traversed the void with their bodies. Some weaker existences would have exploded and perished a long time ago. Roar! Roar! As soon as Jiao Kong finished speaking, two vicious howls with terrifying auras suddenly resounded from the void ahead. Chapter 3701. Whoosh! A weak light that was imperceptible to the naked eye flashed. Yi Xian's figure instantly appeared. He turned his head to look around and slightly frowned. It was exactly the second interstellar coordinate that he had marked in the first universe. It was at the edge of the buffer zone of the root of all evil. The reason why Yi Xian wasn't in a hurry and allowed the second universe's alliance army to leave for more than 10 days before setting off from the demon domain was precisely because of this interstellar coordinate. Yi Xian arrived there almost instantly after activating the interstellar coordinate jump ability of the system's title, crossing the boundless void. The Blue Fleet, the Immortal Legion, and the fleet of space battleships from the 10 ultimate heavenly palaces had left the Diablo space zone a few days earlier than he had. They were at the back. It would take at least a week for them to arrive there. It seems that they're making good progress. The entire buffer zone has been cleared. Yi Xian looked around, only to see the remains of countless black beetles in the void. None of them were alive. They had all been annihilated. There was no doubt that the second universe's army had passed through that area and entered the core of the root of all evil. However, those guys should be stuck at the edge of the core. I wonder if the battle with the local beasts is over yet. After pondering for a moment, Yi Xian shrugged his shoulders. Even if we've already annihilated the native beasts at the edge of the area, this army of 10 million can only stop at the entrance to the depths of the area. The pressure of the desolate ancient creatures' corpses in the air ahead is too terrifying, and it's impossible to get close to them. The Star-Lord local beasts are the real crisis. However, I have the true form of the devil ape. I should be able to go some distance even without the protection of the baby corpses. More importantly, apart from the presence of those who are beyond the Star-Lord state, we also detected some weak vibes when we passed through the territory under the protection of the baby corpses last time. They should be the clansmen of those realm lords. This is extremely illogical. Under such terrifying pressure, these indigenous ferocious beasts with ordinary cultivation would have no way of surviving at all. However, the facts cannot be denied. This means that they possess some sort of secret method that can resist the powerful pressure of those primordial beings in the void. The last time I entered that area, I saw the remains of two primordial ape demons. One of them was only a Star-Lord, and the other was hundreds of thousands of meters long. It should have been a Sector Lord. Now that I can manifest the true form of the devil ape, I should be one of them in the eyes of the powerful aboriginals in the depths of the hinterland. In this way, I will naturally have the opportunity to investigate the secret technique they use to resist the terrifying pressure of the primordial era beings. Just based on this point alone, if I can get what I want, this trip to the source of all evil will not have been in vain. After all, there is a batch of the all-evil origin liquid in the huge nether furnace in the depths of the hinterland every year. I will definitely have to come here often in the future. The headless baby is too unreliable. I can't place all my hopes on him. It's more reliable to grasp the secret technique that can resist the pressure of the remains of the primordial beings. That way, I will be able to enter this area at any time. The share of the all-evil origin liquid condensed by the nether furnace will belong to me every year, not a single drop less. Besides, the secret technique that can resist the terrifying pressure of the primordial beings that the indigenous ferocious beasts living in the hinterland may be an unexpected surprise. As he muttered to himself, Yi Xian tightly clenched his fists. He didn't hesitate any longer, and immediately activated the power of the 3-inch little devil ape that was floating above his sea of consciousness. The next moment, as a feeble rumble echoed inside Yi Xian's body, all the blood and qi in his body was instantly mobilized and activated at full speed. At this moment, the 3-inch devil ape that was originally floating in the air above his sea of consciousness completely disappeared. It transformed into a mysterious power that merged into Yi Xian's body, and had a mysterious effect on all of the vital energy and blood in his body. Yi Xian's body began to change very quickly. His physical appearance began to change, constantly expanding. In the blink of an eye, he had transformed into a black devil ape that was about 10 zhang tall. During this process, 2 other bodies grew out of his body. One was a skeleton that was entirely grayish gold and exuded a metallic texture that gave off an extremely cold feeling. The other was an illusory body of black fog. Its aura was extremely ethereal, as if it didn't exist at all. It was completely a black fog, and only its 2 eyes shone with a terrifying blazing red light. These 2 bodies were also about 10 zhang tall and were connected to the back of Yi Xian's original body, forming the devil ape true body with 3 heads and 6 arms. At this moment, an incomparably dense primordial aura spread out from the devil ape true body. At this point, the devil ape true body was completely revealed. At this moment, no one could see Yi Xian's original appearance anymore. Even the wretched mosquito butcher and the other mysterious old monsters who were familiar with him couldn't see the truth. They simply couldn't tell that this 3-headed, 6-armed ancient devil ape true body was Yi Xian. Then, without hesitation, he activated the spirit source core in his original body's consciousness and successfully transferred it to the illusory head of the devil ape true body. With this spirit source core, the devil ape true body would be able to use all of Yi Xian's mind power techniques, mystic arts, and divine abilities with great ease. However, this wasn't the end of it. He immediately transferred the netherworld claw that had been hovering above his sea of consciousness to the depths of the skull of the devil ape true body. The devil ape true body, which represented Yi Xian's original body, would be able to use all of Yi Xian's other divine abilities and techniques. At this point, the devil ape true body was completely revealed. Although the devil ape true body's aura was only at the 14th stage of the cosmic light realm, the rich primordial aura was incomparably pure and eye-catching. The ancient devil ape true body, which had gone extinct in the distant primordial era, had once again descended on this star field, the source of all evil, after countless years. It was destined that there would be a storm of blood in this place. Everything begins now. From this moment on, my name is Desolate Primordial. Roar. Screech. Whoosh. As he muttered to himself, Yi Xian casually gave his current identity a name. At the same time, the 3 sinister heads of the devil ape's true body raised their heads at the same time, emitting 3 different sounds. However, their ferocious auras were completely the same, angry roars and howls. Chapter 3702. Roar! Roar! As soon as Jiao Kong finished speaking, 2 roars that carried terrifying auras suddenly resounded from the space ahead. They were clearly 2 ferocious beasts at the Region Lord realm, and they'd been hiding in the depths of the core area of the Root of Evil. Earlier, they'd paid no attention to the horrifying battle that had been going on for an entire day. But at this moment, these 2 ferocious beasts at the Region Lord realm had finally made an appearance with the arrival of this army of 10 million warships. Moreover, it was 2 of them. This was no different from a signal, and it had 2 meanings. Firstly, it wasn't that this region didn't have existences that had surpassed the Star Lord realm, and it was even to the extent that there might be some that had surpassed the Region Lord realm. Secondly, it was hinting that these existences at the Region Lord realm and above wouldn't participate in the low-level battles at the borders. They had their own mission, and it was to protect the spatial passageway that led to the depths of the core area. So they wouldn't stand by idly if they were to invade this region. Jiao Kong and Du Jiting's expressions instantly changed when they realized this, and their hearts sank. They were the only 2 region lords in the entire army of the Second Universe, yet 2 ferocious beasts at the Region Lord realm had appeared as soon as they arrived at the depths of the core area of the Root of Evil. Moreover, their high-end combat strength wasn't inferior to their side at all. This caused Jiao Kong and Du Jiting to feel like they'd lost their advantage. They'd lost their sense of superiority and depression. You've overstepped your boundaries. Retreat immediately and leave the core area. Otherwise we'll attack. Along with these two roars, a black and a green ray of light flashed through the expanse of space that was filled with the corpses of primordial beings, and then two colossi instantly appeared. Both of them were around 3 kilometers tall. Obviously, this wasn't the limit of their bloodline true bodies because both of them emanated the aura of region lords. Moreover, both of them were at the advanced stage of the region lord realm, and they were slightly stronger than Jiao Kong and Du Zhiting. Both of them were merely at the 6th rank of the region lord realm, and they were at the peak of the intermediate stage of the region lord realm. They still needed to break through before they could be considered to have stepped into the late stage of the region lord realm. One of the two figures was a green-haired tortoise with long green hairs all over its body, which fluttered without wind. The other was a porcupine beast with a pitch-black body and glossy fur. With a single glance, one could tell that it was an existence with coarse skin and coarse flesh that was very difficult to deal with. Moreover, this porcupine beast had 2 long and narrow blood-colored fangs. It was certain to be extremely tough. With a casual flick of its fangs, even a starry sky fortress with a diameter of 100,000 meters would be pierced through. When they appeared, the primordial porcupine and the primordial hairy tortoise were in the void thousands of miles away. However, as soon as they appeared, they did not stay where they were. They immediately crossed the void and slowly approached. There was a large number of native ferocious beasts below the region lord realm behind them, and there were around 10 million of them. This included the humanoid talkative beasts that had fled into the space ahead and the lucky survivor, the black armored mother. Both of them had recovered from their injuries. However, there were clearly not that many indigenous ferocious beasts that had fled into the void ahead. Clearly, there were other indigenous ferocious beasts' lairs in this area. Not only had the native army recovered from their injuries, their numbers had been replenished as well. Now, they were slowly approaching under the lead of the primordial porcupine and primordial hairy tortoise, and the final battle was about to erupt. This time, even Jiao Kong and Du Zhiting, who were region lords, felt extremely pressured. During the battle before this, the balance of the battle had been tilting towards the joint forces of the various races of the second universe since the beginning. Yet now, the situation seemed to have turned around. The high-end forces of the enemy were actually 2 terrifying existences at the advanced stage of the region lord realm, and even Jiao Kong and Du Zhiting weren't confident in their ability to defeat them. So, the balance of the battle had tilted towards the native ferocious beasts. But even then, Jiao Kong and Du Zhiting's eyes still flickered with a dark glow of excitement. Because they noticed that there were clearly some ferocious beasts at the grotto realm amongst the army of 10 million. It was utterly impossible for such cultivations to survive in this terrifying expanse of space that was filled with the pressure of countless primordial living beings. However, they hadn't exploded into pieces. This proved that these ferocious beasts really did possess some sort of secret technique that could resist the terrifying pressure that was being emanated from the corpses of countless primordial living beings in this expanse of space. So long as they were able to grasp this secret technique, then the army behind them would be able to enter safely. Moreover, even if they lost this battle, and in the end, the entire army of 10 million was forced to retreat, even if they had to withdraw from this core hinterland and retreat to the buffer zone of the central region outside, as long as the two of them could obtain this secret technique, then when the reinforcements of the second universe arrived, Jiao Kong and Du Zhiting could still be considered to have contributed greatly. In the future, once they had taken over the star field, the source of all evil, and fully grasped the void refining formation deep within its core, they might still be able to receive a drop or two of evil origin elixir when they were rewarded for their contributions. Realizing this, Jiao Kong and Du Zhiting's eyes immediately turned red. Their gazes were fixed on the slowly approaching army of ferocious beasts, especially the 2 primordial porcupines and the primordial tortoise at the front of the army. Their cold and ferocious voices immediately rang out. It's not impossible for us to retreat temporarily, as long as you hand over the secret technique that can resist the pressure of the primordial living beings in the expanse of space. That's right, as long as we obtain the secret technique, the army can retreat. At that time, we will only send a small number of powerful experts in. If you have the ability, then just stop them. Screech! Do you think we are easy to bully? Before the two of them could finish speaking, the primordial porcupines and primordial tortoises in the expanse of space in front of them were enraged. They raised their heads and roared at the same time, especially the primordial porcupines, which let out a roar. He felt humiliated that the other party actually said such words. Did they think he was easy to fool because he had a pig brain? This was too much. Amidst the roars, the two long and narrow blood-colored fangs in the primordial porcupine's mouth, which had already reached its feet, suddenly lit up at this moment, emitting an intense blood-colored light that made people unable to look directly at it as it suddenly flicked forward. Whoosh! Rumble! Boom! Chapter 3703. Black Boar, do you want to die? How dare you sneak attack us? Attack! All the experts above the Genesis realm, attack immediately. Caught off guard, the primordial porcupine took action first and tore a space crack in the middle of the army, directly destroying thousands of battleships, fortresses. This scene infuriated Zhao Kong and Du Jiting, who immediately roared. Furthermore, he immediately gave the order to start the battle. Hum. Hum. Dense buzzing sounds came from the battleships and fortresses behind them. This was the rhythm of the battleships and fortresses charging at full power. The cannons on the battleships were about to be activated and fired. At the same time, a large number of experts of various races flew out from the battleships. Zhao Kong had already given the order. In the entire army, except for the higher-ups who were in charge of commanding the fleet, everyone above the 13th Great Realm, the Genesis Realm, had to rush into the void to participate in the battle. In the entire army, there were dozens of Star Lords, hundreds of Universe Realm experts, tens of thousands of Cosmic Realm experts, and more than 1 million Genesis Realm experts. All of them surged out, activating their bloodlines and manifesting their bloodline true forms. They instantly transformed into enormous beasts and spread out in front of the army of 10 million battleships, roaring and roaring as they charged forward. At the same time, two figures rushed out from the flagship fortresses of the Blood Wyrm clan and the Colorful Python clan. They were the two old monsters of the fleet, Zhao Kong and Du Jiting. Whoosh! Screech! Zhao Kong and Du Jiting immediately activated the bloodline in their bodies and showed their bloodline true bodies as soon as they appeared. A blood-colored one-horned Wyrm appeared in the void and charged at the primordial porcupine. As for Du Jiting, his bloodline true body was also tens of thousands of feet long. He was a 7-colored python, and his tongue was thousands of feet long. His speed was extremely fast, and he rushed out like a blood-red bolt of lightning. In the blink of an eye, he had swept up 2 cosmic light realm savage beasts in the void in front of him and swallowed them into his mouth, chewing them in front of everyone. So ferocious. Then, before anyone could react, this 7-colored python's eyes suddenly blazed. 2 beams of demonic light shot out of its eyes and turned into a ray of light that whistled out. After shooting out, its speed was extremely fast. There was even a strange sizzling sound in the void, as if boiling oil had been poured into ice and was melting quickly. It was the bloodline ability of the Colorful Python clan, Furious Python Rainbow. All those years ago, a genius from a top-rate clan in the technological faction of the human race had unintentionally flashed in front of the 2 beams of 7-colored light shot out from Medusa's Furious Python Rainbow. He was struck by these dazzling and resplendent beams of energy, and it caused his figure to suddenly stop moving. In an instant, he started to petrify at a visible speed, and he completely transformed into a gray stone statue. He didn't possess even a trace of vitality, and he fell to the ground below the battlefield before collapsing and perishing. Yet now, such a terrifying bloodline ability had been shot out from the eyes of a formidable multicolored python at the Region Lord realm, and its might was terrifying to the extreme. Moreover, its speed was utterly unbelievable. The 2 multicolored and resplendent beams of light instantly shot into the army of native ferocious beasts behind the primeval turtle. Screech! Roar! Furious roars and shrill howls resounded in an instant, but it was extremely short, and it only lasted half a roar before it stopped. The 2 enormous beams of blazing multicolored light pushed forward, and all the native ferocious beasts that were struck along the way trembled violently before losing their vitality. They transformed into petrified gray stones that fell down from the sky. It was just a bloodline magical power, but it had killed at least thousands of indigenous beasts. Among them, the most powerful one was actually a universe master. The power of this attack was not weaker than the previous sneak attack of the primordial porcupine. Finally, they had won back some face. It made countless strong people of various races in the second universe in the millions of battleship army behind them feel refreshed. At the same time, Zhao Kong, who'd transformed into a ferocious blood Wyrm, smashed his fist forward as well. After that, a blood Wyrm of similar size roared as it shot out, and it instantly arrived before the primeval porcupine before swallowing it. Screech! The primeval porcupine raised its head and roared angrily. Its two long and narrow blood-colored claws suddenly shook, and a huge blood-colored shield appeared in front of the primeval porcupine. Its body instantly disappeared, and when it reappeared, it had already passed behind the blood Wyrm that Jiao Kong had blasted out with the blood Wyrm demon punch. Its huge body, which was thousands of feet long, had quietly completed the void teleportation. Caught off guard, it approached the blood Wyrm's abdomen. Its eyes flashed fiercely, and its fangs directly pierced toward the blood Wyrm's abdomen. Rip. The familiar sound of cloth tearing could be heard, and then a scarlet rain of blood fell from the sky. The blood Wyrm's body was too huge, and Jiao Kong didn't expect this primeval porcupine to have mastered some of the universe's void law. Such a close-distance void teleportation could be done without making a sound. Even he couldn't catch the slightest fluctuation. Caught off guard, the blood Wyrm got close to him. In the blink of an eye, a bloody wound that was 300 meters long appeared under its abdomen. It had suffered a great loss, and a rain of blood fell from the sky. While the monstrous battle was unfolding, in another void, the moment it rushed up, it suddenly launched a sneak attack. It ignored the primeval turtle and attacked the large number of native beasts behind it. It had successfully killed thousands of powerful native beasts, and at this moment, it had clearly angered the primeval turtle. Screech! An incomparably shrill and short howl rang out, and the green fur all over the primordial hairy tortoise's body instantly expanded. In just half a breath of time, the vast void space of 10,000 miles had already turned into a strange sea of green fur. At this moment, the original body of the primordial tortoise had disappeared, and its aura couldn't be sensed anymore. On the contrary, the huge body of the huge seven-colored serpent was shrouded in this weird sea of green hair. Roar! Swish! Shrill howls instantly resounded. The entire vast and powerful sea of green fur rose and fell incessantly, and it shook this expanse of space. Moreover, the shrill howls of the rainbow python frequently resounded from amidst the strange green fur that surged like waves. Obviously, it wasn't a match for the primeval turtle's strange bloodline ability, and it was trapped within the sea of green fur and was injured at the first possible moment. In the blink of an eye, the four region lords on both sides had fallen into a heated battle. However, the situation was clearly disadvantageous to the allied forces of the Second Universe. No matter if it was the blood Wyrm, Jiao Kong, or the rainbow python, Du Zhiding, both of them weren't a match for their opponent as soon as they entered into battle, and they were injured in succession. Chapter 3704. Bang! Swish! Rumble! As soon as the battle began, the two supreme experts at the Region Lord realm who resided within the army of the Second Universe had been injured by the primeval porcupine and the primeval tortoise respectively. The former's blood Wyrm had a huge hole opened up in its stomach by the blood-red fangs of the primeval porcupine, and a rain of blood sprayed down from it. Moreover, the latter's entire body was enveloped by the ocean of green fur formed by the primeval tortoise's body, and it was firmly restrained within this strange ocean that caused one's scalp to go numb. It was unable to struggle free, and only numerous unwilling howls and shrill howls could be heard from within the surging waves of green fur. All of this shocked the countless experts within the army of the Second Universe. The higher-ups of the various clans who were in charge of commanding the fleet were filled with terror and uneasiness, and they immediately gave the order to attack with all their might at the first possible moment after all the battleships were fully charged. The sound of air being torn apart and explosions resounded throughout the heavens and the earth. Numerous beams of energy of various sizes shot out from within the army of battleships, and they interweaved into an enormous net that enveloped the battlefield. Only around 40% of the dense energy beams of the battleship cannons blasted towards the army of native ferocious beasts in the distance. On the other hand, around 60% of the remaining energy beams were split into two. One blasted towards the left of the battlefield, and its target was the primeval porcupine. The other wave blasted towards the right of the center of the battlefield, towards the sea of green hair that covered a distance of 5,000 kilometers and completely drowned the figure of the 100,000-foot-long Du Zhiding, firmly restraining him. The commanders of the various clans had clearly noticed that the two region lords who resided within the army weren't a match for the primeval porcupine and the primeval tortoise at all. Jiao Kong and Du Zhiding were the souls and mental pillars of the entire fleet. If they were to perish or suffer heavy injuries, then the entire army would be utterly defeated, and it would be utterly impossible for them to gain a foothold in this region that was the source of all evil. They would be like stray dogs that had been swiftly forced to flee. Go! It was for this reason that more than half of the countless beams of light fired by the tens of thousands of warships were split into two groups and blasted towards the sea of green hair transformed from the primordial porcupine and the primordial hairy tortoise respectively. On one hand, they wanted to help the blood Wyrm heavily injure the primeval porcupine, and on the other hand, they wanted to tear apart the ocean of green fur that covered 5,000 kilometers in order to rescue Du Zhiding. It was truly a good plan, but it was indeed the only thing that the higher-ups of the various clans in the second universe could do. Their cultivations were utterly unable to participate in such a battle between region lords. The only thing they could do was utilize the might of the battleship cannons of the battleship army and launch a dense barrage of attacks. Unfortunately, they'd overestimated the might of these cannons in the end. Or perhaps, they'd underestimated the ability of region lords. The first to launch an attack was the primeval porcupine who just made a huge hole in the blood Wyrm's stomach. Obviously, it had been hurt by the energy beams from the battleships. Even though the energy beams that covered the heavens and the earth were converged together, then even its 3 kilometers body would be completely enveloped by the energy beams of the battleship cannons, even though it hadn't been able to tear apart its skin. Red spots had been left on its body, and it caused the porcupine to suddenly howl violently. After that, its figure suddenly vanished on the spot, and it flashed to the center of the army of the second universe behind the central territory. Hong long long. With a loud rumble, the primordial porcupine suddenly moved to the center of the battleship army. Its body, which was originally only about 1,000 meters tall, rapidly expanded at this moment. In just half a breath, it was already 10,000 meters tall, and the two blood-colored fangs in its mouth also reached 10,000 meters in length. It wasn't much smaller than a small fort with a diameter of 50 kilometers. In the next instant, true calamity descended. Ow! A crazy roar came from the mouth of the 10,000-foot-long porcupine. Immediately after, its 10,000-foot-long body rampaged through the army of millions of people in the second universe. A monstrous aura of madness raged through the entire expanse of space. The most terrifying thing about the porcupine was that it went berserk. Once it went berserk, then even world lords couldn't help but fear it. Such existences were truly too tough, and they were extremely difficult to kill. However, it just so happened that their vital blood energy was terrifying to the extreme. Those two fangs were simply nightmares. According to legend, during the primeval times, there was once a 30 kilometers tall primeval porcupine that was at the World Lord realm. It rampaged madly through the starry sky of the universe, and even the stars in space were directly slashed apart by its extremely sharp and terrifying fangs. Or they were smashed apart, and no one could stop it at all. And now, the various warships, fortresses of the second universe's 10 million strong army were like the stars that had been ravaged by the Sector Lord primordial porcupine in the primordial age when it had gone mad. Wherever the 10,000 feet tall porcupine passed, there was no suspense, even if it was 100,000 meters in diameter. It was torn apart at the first instance. The primeval porcupine's 30 kilometers tall body charged left and right, rampaging through the army of millions. Its terrifying pair of bloody fangs were like a pair of harvesters, and all the battleships that blocked its path were all turned into paper paste, shattering into pieces, exploding into huge fireballs and falling into the void below. This scene happened too suddenly. Before the 100,000 feet blood flood dragon, whose abdomen had been torn open by the ancient porcupine before it went crazy, could recover from its shock, countless terrifying explosions came from the battlefield behind it. In just a short span of 2 to 3 breaths, at least 1 million battleships were destroyed. The more severe ones were directly disintegrated, completely turning into fireballs, and were thus annihilated. Those that were slightly more lightly injured temporarily lost the ability to continue fighting. The battleships were damaged, and they no longer had the time to launch attacks. They hurriedly tried to repair themselves. Retreat! Immediately retreat! Retreat from the core hinterland, retreat to the buffer zone outside, immediately. Seeing this scene, Jiao Kong, who had transformed into a 30 kilometers tall blood flood dragon, opened his eyes wide. The primeval porcupine's cultivation was originally stronger than his, reaching the late stage of the Domain Lord realm. Even if it hadn't gone crazy, he wasn't its match. Caught off guard, his abdomen was immediately cut open. A 300 m long gap. And now, the primeval porcupine had clearly gone berserk. Its body, which was originally only a few thousand feet, had directly expanded to 100,000 feet. Coupled with its pair of incomparably sharp bloody fangs, and its rough black skin that even the ship's cannons couldn't penetrate, this was simply fatal. It was definitely a genuine starry sky roller. The current Jiao Kong didn't even dare to approach. Although the army of millions was huge, it couldn't withstand the torment of this crazy primeval porcupine. If it plowed back and forth 7 or 8 more times, the entire army of millions would probably be completely destroyed. Chapter 3705. Boom! Rumble! Roar! In the void, endless rumbling sounds of explosions rose and fell, reverberating endlessly. From time to time, there would be a sky-shattering roar. The primordial porcupine was enraged. Of the countless large and small ship cannons that were bombarding it, except for the black antimatter energy beams that it had felt threatened by, which it had avoided, the rest of the normal ship cannons had all hit its body. Even though it wasn't able to tear apart the primordial porcupine's black hide, which was said to be more durable than the abyss tortoise's shell, it still left red spots of varying sizes on its body. Some of them were even slightly swollen. To be able to make the thick black skin of the immemorial porcupine show red spots and slight swelling, it was obvious how painful it was. This made it go berserk, and it had completely gone berserk. The immemorial porcupine was known for its resistance to beatings and daring to go berserk. Once it went berserk, even sector lords would have to retreat, not daring to face it head-on. At this moment, it was rampaging in this army of 10 million battleships. It was no different from a crazy black boar charging into a field of cabbages. The difference. Fortunately, when Jiao Kong saw that the situation was not right, he made a prompt decision and ordered the entire fleet to retreat. In an instant, the scattered beams of light from the battleships completely disappeared. None of the battleships dared to stay in this terrifying void any longer. They all turned on their energy shields and ran at full speed, heading straight for the boundary line that led to the central region buffer zone of the root of all evil. The entire army of 10 million finally started to retreat after destroying 1 million battleships. At the same time, in the void in front of the battlefield, all the experts above the Genesis realm who were fighting with the army of 10 million native beasts were retreating as well. They didn't have the heart to fight anymore and just wanted to leave this crazy star field as quickly as possible. At the same time, after the Blood Dragon gave the order for the entire fleet to evacuate, it did not dare to rush to the rear and touch the head of the wild boar. Instead, it directly charged at the sea of green fur on the right side of the battlefield. Even if they were completely defeated, they had to rescue the region lord of the colored python clan, Du Jiting. Otherwise, the entire allied forces would collapse completely. The death of a region lord was sufficient to cause the fleets of the various clans to fall into a state of panic. Screech! Screech! At this moment, the sea of green hair that was thousands of kilometers away was still surging with green waves, and from time to time, extremely shrill and terrifying screams could be heard. Du Yachting, who had activated his bloodline true body and transformed into a colorful python, was clearly not in a good state. One could vaguely hear the terrible howls and screams coming from the rolling waves of green hair. A kind of shock and fear could be vaguely heard. Since it was able to make a supreme elder at the region lord realm let out shrill cries of terror and panic, this obviously showed how terrifying everything he was suffering right now was. Even the 10,000 feet long blood flood dragon, which was gritting its teeth and charging toward the rolling sea of green hair, felt like it was going into battle. Its back was already cold. Earlier, when the Allied forces of the Second Universe launched their first volley of attacks, around 30% of the energy beams from their cannons had blasted towards the sea of green hair that was thousands of kilometers away. Not to mention the energy beams from ordinary star obliterator cannons that were unable to pose a threat to region lords at all. Merely the energy beams from the antimatter deathlight cannons that were blasted out from the smaller forts with a diameter of 50,000 meters and the larger forts with a diameter of 100,000 meters were absolutely capable of dealing damage to this sea of green hair. The sea of green hair formed from the primeval turtle's body had caused material damage. This wasn't related to the primeval turtle's strength at all, and it was entirely a problem of its energy attribute. The antimatter deathlight cannons could melt all matter and energy of the positive attribute. Even though the sea of green hair formed from the primeval turtle's body was strange, it was a positive attribute substance in the end. Earlier, when a few thousand antimatter deathlight cannons had blasted over in unison, the sea of green hair was too vast. It covered an entire 5,000 kilometers of space, so it was utterly impossible for it to dodge like the primeval porcupine had done. The direct result of this was that the sea of green hair that was 5,000 kilometers away was instantly riddled with holes, and a few thousand holes that were around 20,000 kilometers wide had appeared within the sea of green hair. If it was any other living being, then such an attack would have probably perished on the spot. But to the primeval turtle, Even though these few thousand holes that appeared within the sea of green hair had caused it to suffer a certain degree of injury, it couldn't be considered to be a minor injury. Even if it couldn't be considered to be a heavy injury, it wasn't far off. There were too many of them. But in reality, those terrifying holes had practically vanished in an instant. After all, it was a vast sea formed from countless strange green hairs. Those strange green hairs flowed like seawater, and they instantly filled up all the holes. Even if the primeval turtle's body had suffered injuries because of this, it was slowly recovering through some sort of special ability within the sea of green hair. If there was a ray of light that could pierce through the ceaselessly surging green hair and see the situation within the sea of green hair, then that person would notice to their astonishment that, at the center of the sea of green hair was a 30 kilometers long rainbow python that had been blasted into two, and it was struggling incessantly with exhaustion. It was the bloodline true body that the region lord of the Rainbow Python clan, Du Jiting, had revealed. At this moment, its bloodline true body had been blasted into two, and around a third of its tail had been separated from its body. However, this wasn't caused by the primeval turtle, and it was the result of the numerous black pillars of antimatter energy that had left behind over 1,000 enormous holes in the sea of green hair. At that time, the rainbow python was within the sea of green hair, and its figure couldn't be seen at all. The commanders of the various fleets in the second universe had been dazed for a moment, and they'd forgotten that they might accidentally injure the rainbow python. So, they'd actually directly ordered around 30% of the energy pillars to be blasted towards the sea of green hair that was 5,000 kilometers away. Though several black antimatter energy beams that were 30,000 meters in diameter had pierced through the sea of green fur, leaving huge holes that were right next to each other, the entire body of the 10,000 feet long rainbow python that happened to be in those spots was hence split into two. Chapter 3706. Screech. Screech. In the sea of green fur 5,000 kilometers away, Du Jiting's miserable howls grew even more shrill and miserable. Not only did they reveal dense terror, it was even to the extent that a weak aura was swiftly becoming denser. Unfortunately, no matter how he struggled, he couldn't break free from the main body that had been blasted apart. Tiny green hairs that were as dense as hair pierced into his flesh, immobilizing him. At the same time, these tiny green hairs that had pierced into the flesh and blood of his true body not only had the effect of binding his body, but also had an even more terrifying power. They were like tiny straws that were sucking the flesh and blood of his colored python true body. Previously, the sea of green hair that the primordial turtle had transformed into had been bombarded by countless energy beams from the ship's cannons, especially the thousands of black antimatter energy beams. Their power was too terrifying. Even a domain lord like the primordial turtle couldn't withstand them. Thousands of holes had been blasted into the sea of green hair thousands of kilometers away, causing the primordial turtle to suffer heavy injuries. However, these injuries were quickly healed. Although they hadn't completely healed, they were at least half healed. The energy used to heal the injuries came from the countless tiny green hairs that pierced into the flesh and blood of the colored python true body of Du Jiting. This was completely treating the colored python true body as a source of flesh and blood, and was about to suck it dry. It was precisely because of this that a dignified old monster like Du Jiting, in a situation where he couldn't break free no matter what, would reveal such a strong sense of fear even in his miserable howls. Even a domain lord couldn't resist the horror of being sucked dry alive. It was too cruel, and it made his hair stand on end. Roar! Old Du, you're still holding on at a time like this. Have you lost your mind? This sea of green hair is too strange and too flexible. Even I can't break it open. If you want to break free, you have to break free from the inside. Don't hesitate. Sever your own bloodline true body and escape with your life. Otherwise, when that berserk primordial porcupine regains its senses and rushes here, this old man can also retreat. At that time, you won't be able to escape even if you grow wings. Roar! Jiao Kong's tens of thousands of meters long blood flood dragon flew a circle around the sea of green hair. In the end, he was sure that he couldn't come up with a solution to break out of this sea of green hair in a short time. He could only grit his teeth and let out a furious roar, reminding Du Jiting, who was trapped in the sea of green hair, to destroy his bloodline true body and escape. These roars immediately alarmed the primordial porcupine that was wreaking havoc in the rear of the battlefield. At this time, the tens of millions of battleships of the allied forces of all races in the second universe had already left. In the void behind the battlefield, except for some damaged battleships that had been blown into huge fireballs, there were not many battleships left. A large area of empty space appeared. Disturbed by the roar of the tens of thousands of meters long blood flood dragon, the primordial porcupine, which was still in a berserk state, immediately turned its head and looked over. Its huge eyes flashed with crazy bloody light. Without hesitation, it raised its head and roared, then immediately spread its 4 huge legs and rushed toward the sea of green hair. During this time, the pair of huge bloody fangs of the primordial porcupine fiercely flicked at the tens of thousands of meters long blood flood dragon hovering above the sea of green hair from 1,000,000 miles away. Whoosh! Space split apart as an enormous spatial rift suddenly appeared in the space below the blood flood dragon. A strand of terrifying suction force swept over, and it almost caused the blood flood dragon to stagger and fall into the spatial rift. If that really happened, then with Jiao Kong's cultivation as a region lord, even if he didn't perish, he would still be able to struggle free and charge out of the spatial rift in the end. But at the very least, he would lose a layer of skin even if he survived. The primordial porcupine was too difficult to deal with. Not only was its skin thick, its blood-red fangs were a nightmare to deal with. Coupled with the fact that it possessed the laws of space, it wasn't just capable of silently teleporting through space. Even a region lord wouldn't be able to catch a trace of its aura. Moreover, it even possessed such a long-range method of attacking with the laws of space. It was simply impossible to guard against. At the very least, Jiao Kong was terrified of it, and he didn't dare to rashly face it. When he saw the primordial porcupine charging towards him with a pair of bloodshot eyes, it was clear that it was still in a berserk state. His face immediately turned green with rage. Roar! Old fellow, that thick-skinned fellow is running madly over here. I don't want to go against him. If you hesitate any longer, then they'll surround you together. Forget it, I'll be leaving first. Take your time to think about it. The blood flood dragon roared furiously once more, and he really didn't dare stay here any longer. His figure flashed as he charged towards the boundary that led to the central region. At the same time, Du Jiting, who was trapped within the ocean of green fur, seemed to have finally made up his mind at this moment. Roar! A sorrowful cry that was filled with unwillingness and monstrous rage resounded from within the ocean of green fur. After that, a ray of 7-colored light suddenly appeared amidst the ceaselessly surging waves of green fur. It flashed for a moment before it struggled free of the waves of green fur and charged into the sky above the waves. After that, it turned around and chased after the blood flood dragon that had just turned around and left. It was only at this moment that the ray of 7-colored light revealed its true form, and it was actually a small colored python that was covered in injuries. Originally, as a region lord, Du Jiting's body could reach a height of 30 kilometers after he activated his bloodline and revealed his bloodline true essence. Yet now, Du Jiting had no choice but to sever his bloodline true essence in order to struggle free of the restraints of that damnable ocean of green fur. At this moment, only his main body had escaped from the ocean of green fur. Even though he was still in the form of a 7-colored python, his body had shrunk greatly and was only around 300 m long. The worst part was that he was covered in injuries. Only a large portion of his body remained, and a small portion of his tail had been completely destroyed. It would take a very long period of time to recover. As for his cultivation, it had even fallen from the 6th rank of the Region Lord realm to the 7th rank of the Star Lord realm. It was a drop of almost an entire realm. Even if he spared no expense to recover at full speed after escaping the core region, he would only be able to recover to the 1st rank of the Region Lord realm in a short period of time at most. If he wanted to possess the formidable combat strength of a mid-stage Region Lord once more, then he would probably have to wait until this expedition was over and he returned to the ancestral land of his race in the 2nd universe. Roar! With grief in its heart, the 1,000-foot-long 7-colored giant python raised its head and roared angrily. Without any hesitation, it followed closely behind the 10,000-foot-long blood dragon. Like a tiny dot, it finally passed through the boundary of the core hinterland of the origin of all evil and escaped to the buffer zone of the central region outside. Chapter 3707. Screech! An extremely shrill howl resounded abruptly. After that, the Region Lord Du Jiting of the Colored Python clan, who'd severed his bloodline true body and seemed extremely weak because he'd lost a portion of his tail, had passed through the core of the root of all evil. The boundary between the buffer zone and the central region had arrived at the central region. As far as the eye could see, the entire buffer zone was in chaos. The space was filled with the remains of black beetles that had been blasted apart. They were densely spread out, and there was even a large amount of grayish-green liquid floating in midair. The air was filled with a nauseating stench. Compared to the countless remains of black beetles, there were even more battleships, fortresses, and fortresses of the various races of the Second Universe that were in such chaos that even their formations couldn't be discerned. The allied forces of the various races of the Second Universe had won a great victory in this battle, and they'd cleared the periphery of the core of the root of all evil. A large amount of enormous corpses were floating in midair in that area. There were the corpses of the numerous native ferocious beasts in the core of the root of all evil, and there were also the bloodline true bodies of the various races of the Second Universe that had activated their bloodlines. But right after that, the entire fleet seized the opportunity to pursue the enemy and charge into the depths of the core of the root of all evil. Everything was reversed, and a nightmare had descended. Needless to say, the combat strength of the two native ferocious beasts at the Region Lord realm was truly shocking. They were already at the 7th rank of the Region Lord realm, which was the late stage of the Region Lord realm. However, it just so happened that their race was so obscure, and their bloodline talents were simply impossible to deal with. Zhao Kong and Du Jiting, who were both Region Lords of the Second Universe who were slightly weaker than them in terms of cultivation, were completely suppressed. They were extremely furious. He was being completely suppressed. The primordial porcupine's combat strength was unparalleled, and its pair of peerlessly sharp blood-red fangs were simply a nightmare. It just so happened that its thick black skin was extremely tough, and even the energy beams of the superstar obliteration cannon from the 10,000-meter-tall fortress were only able to leave behind red spots on its skin. Not only was he unable to break through this layer of pigskin, he had instead stimulated its vicious nature, causing it to go completely berserk, turning into a 10,000 zhong long berserk porcupine. In such a state, even ordinary initial sector lords would have to retreat. This meant that the old monster Zhao Kong wouldn't dare to face it head-on. The other immemorial turtle wasn't as powerful as Jihao, but its bloodline talent, the Sea of Green Hair, was indeed creepy. Once it was used, the primordial hairy tortoise's entire body turned into a sea of green hairs that covered thousands of miles of the void. Once it trapped the enemy, countless hairs would pierce into the enemy's flesh and blood, binding them tightly. At the same time, the primordial hairy tortoise's entire body was constantly sucking through the green hairs. Obtain the power of blood, flesh, and qi and blood. However, such a boundless sea of countless tiny green hairs had a headache-inducing flexibility. No matter how they attacked, it was useless. A few waves would immediately dissolve it. Even if they used the black antimatter death ray cannons to attack, although they could cause damage, the holes they created could be filled up immediately. That feeling was like punching into the sea. Wherever the fist energy passed, it would create a passageway, but before the fist energy could reach the sea, it would create a passageway. When the fist was pulled out, the passageway would be filled up by the surrounding seawater. The primordial hairy tortoise's state was simply like an unkillable cockroach. Unless countless antimatter energy beams were used at once to completely wipe out the entire sea of green hairs, otherwise, as you attacked, it would pierce countless tiny green hairs into the enemy's body, sucking in the flesh and blood to repair itself. There was simply no solution. It could be said that the reason why the allied forces of the Second Universe had been defeated in this battle was entirely because of the primordial porcupine and the primordial hairy tortoise. Not only were these two extremely rare ancient beings powerful to the point of making one's hair stand on end, their respective bloodline talents were also extremely unpopular, causing Zhao Kong and Du Jiting to be caught off guard. As soon as they came into contact with each other, they had already lost, and it was impossible to reverse the situation. That was why the entire army had been defeated in an instant. Otherwise, if Zhao Kong could resist the attacks of the primordial porcupine, and Du Jiting could resist the attacks of the primordial hairy tortoise, the huge army of native ferocious beasts led by the humanoid multi-mouthed monster, the black-armored Mother Empress, and the other native ferocious beasts might not have been able to resist the forces of the Second Universe. Tens of millions of battleships of the Allied forces were bombarding them. However, it was too late to say all of that now. A great defeat was a great defeat. Although the Allied forces of the Second Universe, which had more than 10 million battleships of all kinds, had left behind more than 9 million battleships of all kinds that had fled to the Central Region's buffer zone. Moreover, the two region lords, who were the top combatants of the entire fleet, had at least managed to escape alive even if they were injured. After some recovery, they could still maintain the strength of a region lord. This was especially so for Zhao Kong, who was a region lord of the Blood Wyrm clan. His injuries were almost negligible, and his combat strength wasn't affected much. However, a great defeat was a great defeat in the end. Moreover, this great defeat had descended in just half a day after the original complete victory. The impact on the morale of the entire Allied forces of the Second Universe was immeasurable. Now, as far as the eye could see, the nearly 10 million battleships of all kinds in the central region's buffer zone were in chaos. Even their battle formations were in chaos. All the battleships were giving off a gloomy and dejected aura. It was a complete mess. Under such circumstances, the Blood Wyrm clan's old monster, Jiao Kong, who was still in peak condition, immediately dispelled his bloodline true body state and disappeared from the void. He took human form and rushed into the flagship fortress of the Blood Wyrm clan's fleet. No matter what, he had to reorganize the entire allied forces at the first possible moment and try his best to recover their morale as soon as possible. As for Du Jiting, who'd charged out from the dividing line right behind him, Jiao Kong couldn't be bothered to pay any attention to him. In any case, he'd noticed the situation of his pursuers when he'd charged out from the dividing line. The army of native ferocious beasts hadn't pursued him at all. It was even to the extent that they hadn't pursued him beyond the depths of the core region, and this included the primeval porcupine and tortoise that were in a berserk state. Under such circumstances, even though Du Jiting's cultivation had fallen by an entire realm and could be said to be extremely weak right now, it wouldn't be long before he charged back to the Colored Python clan's flagship fortress. Once he recovered at full strength, it wouldn't be long before he regained his strength as a region lord. There was no need for Jiao Kong to worry about him at all. Chapter 3708. At that moment, Du Jiting, the elder of the Colored Python clan, had not only fallen from the realm of a region lord to the Star Lord realm, but his original body was also covered in wounds. Coupled with the grief and indignation in his heart, he was caught off guard. By the time he realized what was happening, it was already too late. After all, the withered demon Bloodblade was a Starry Sky Supreme treasure and not a quasi-Starry Sky Supreme treasure. Not only was the slash extremely powerful, but as long as Yi Xian was willing, he could even conceal his killing intent within the blade. The target would only notice it when the blade touched their skin. Moreover, Yi Xian's cultivation had far surpassed his original level in his true form of the demonic ape. He had reached the 14th realm, the cosmic light realm. As such, the final outcome was more or less decided. With just one slash, the head of the huge rainbow python was chopped off, and it died an unnatural death. In the next moment, Yi Xian appeared and waved his hand, taking Du Jiting's headless body into his undying world. If the old man was in his human form, Yi Xian wouldn't be able to take his body because he would have a psychological barrier. It wouldn't be good to roast and eat it. However, it didn't matter if he was in his original form of the rainbow python. He wasn't afraid even if the rainbow python's body was highly toxic. The dual-colored flames of the Shengnong cauldron would expel all the toxins. Of course, the reason why the old man's head and body were still intact after being beheaded by the withered demon Bloodblade was because Yi Xian had deliberately controlled the withered demon Bloodblade so that it wouldn't absorb the essence of the old man's blood. On one hand, Yi Xian couldn't bear to let the withered demon Bloodblade absorb such precious flesh. On the other hand, he was worried that the withered demon blade spirit inside the blade would fully recover if he did. If that happened, it would really trigger the so-called heavenly aura detection and cause the heavenly tribulation to descend. To Yi Xian, even if he had a way to avoid being detected by the heavenly aura detection, this was still an opportunity to secretly scheme against someone. How could he just let it go to waste? When he waved his hand and put away the remains of the python, his true form of the devil ape with 3 heads and 6 arms was exposed. His concealment state was removed, and his figure appeared in the void. However, this didn't matter anymore. In front of them was the dividing line between the central region's buffer zone and the core region. Yi Xian could pass through it with a single leap. Although he did not know what had happened inside, he could see that the Second Universe's army was in such a bad state. They must have encountered a powerful native beast and been forced to leave. However, Yi Xian was not afraid. He was now in his 3-headed, 6-armed devil ape true form. It had to be noted that the remains of 2 primordial ape demons had been found in the void deep inside the central hinterland. One of them was only a Star Lord, while the other was so strong that it was beyond the Sector Lord level. Judging from the remains of the 2 primordial ape demons, Yi Xian would definitely not be considered an intruder by the native beasts inside as soon as he appeared. Instead, they would probably consider him as one of their own. Of course, to ensure this effect, Yi Xian had taken other precautions, such as the colorful python's head that was twisted in the right hand of his true form of the devil ape. Even if the native beasts in the core hinterland had doubts about his origins, after all, although there were 2 corpses in the void within the remains of the ancient demon ape, Yi Xian, the one who was alive, had clearly appeared out of nowhere. Even if that was the case, The colorful python's head in his hand was enough to prove that he was a friend and not an enemy, which would resolve the native beast's doubts in the central hinterland. Using the head of a zone lord as a sign of allegiance was definitely enough, both in terms of weight and sincerity. In fact, Yi Xian had already planned everything. He had been thinking that it would be great if he could kill a Star-Lord expert or a heavily wounded Star-Lord expert in the Second Universe's coalition army with a sneak attack. Then, he would definitely be able to convince the natives in the central hinterland of the root of all evil if he presented his head to them. The ferocious beasts immediately accepted. He didn't expect that he would run into a heavily wounded Star-Lord colorful python when he raised his head while he was still thinking about the idea. He immediately made a decision and killed the python. He was still holding the python's head in his hand, but Yi Xian didn't know that he had actually killed the python. It was a Zone Lord expert whose level had dropped. Otherwise, he wouldn't have dared to attack. A man's reputation was like a tree's shadow, and a Zone Lord expert was famous for his ferocity. Even if he was heavily injured and his level had dropped, Yi Xian had to consider it carefully. And now, with the head in his hand, not only was his hidden body exposed, but his series of actions were also clearly seen by the powerhouses of the various races of the Second Universe and the chaotic battleships in the void behind him. The experts of the fleets of the Second Universe, who had fled to the buffer zone of the central region, had been paying close attention to the direction of the path behind them since they arrived. After all, Zhao Kong and Du Jiting were the pillars and souls of the entire fleet. If they didn't escape, the entire fleet wouldn't have a backbone. It was precisely because of this that when Zhao Kong and Du Jiting rushed out of the dividing line one after another and entered their sights, all the experts in the nearly 10 million battleships heaved a sigh of relief at the first moment. Then, Zhao Kong, the Zone Lord of the Blood Wyrm clan, deactivated his bloodline true form and returned to his human form. He flashed and entered the flagship fortress of the Blood Wyrm clan. Du Jiting, the Zone Lord of the Colored Python clan, was obviously heavily injured. His level had dropped, and he was only a Star Lord at the moment. However, it didn't matter. Zone Lords had extraordinary means. After he returned to the flagship fortress of the Colored Python clan, he would heal his wounds. Even if he couldn't immediately return to his peak strength, he would still be able to reach the early stage of the Zone Lord realm. Feeling uneasy, the commander of the Colored Python clan's fleet even immediately gave an order for the flagship fortress of the fleet to come forward and welcome the Zone Lord. However, at this moment, a black demonic blade silently extended from the void and cut off Du Jiting's head with one slash. Then, a three-headed, six-armed ancient ape demons, which was obviously a ferocious native beast, but was extremely small, only about 30 meters tall. It should be a little demon ape cub. It waved its hand and put away the headless body of the colored python. Then, it carried the head of the colored python, turned around, and rushed to the boundary line ahead. Chapter 3709. A Region Lord Old Monster? An elder of the Colored Python clan? Yi Xian was so scared that his body trembled and his legs almost went limp. Only now did he remember that the colored python that he beheaded seemed to have followed closely behind the Blood Flood Dragon clan's 10,000-foot-long Blood Flood Dragon and rushed out from the core area in front of them. If nothing unexpected happened, it was very possible that it was an elder of the Colored Python clan. It was just that it was heavily injured and its cultivation had dropped by a large realm. He had really hit the jackpot. He had actually killed an elder of the Colored Python clan in a moment of carelessness. No one would dare to believe this. Boom. Whoosh. Whoosh. Just as he was in a state of shock, the densely packed and chaotic battleships behind him had already begun to bombard him. Beams of energy from the battleship's cannons shot towards Yi Xian like a tidal wave, as if they didn't cost anything. One of the two area lords of the fleet had been assassinated. This matter was too serious, and there was no need for anyone to give the order. The powerhouses of the various fleets of the Second Universe almost subconsciously launched a volley of attacks at him. Roar! Little monkey, you deserve to die. An earth-shattering roar resounded as a figure rushed out from the flagship fortress of the Blood Wyrm clan. It was the elder of the Blood Wyrm clan who had just returned, the Region Lord Old Monster Zhao Kong. At this moment, Zhao Kong was so regretful that his intestines turned green. He had only relaxed after confirming that there were no pursuers behind him. He had deactivated his bloodline true body and rushed into the flagship fortress of the Blood Wyrm clan's fleet. This was also because he had seen the nearly 10 million allied fleets that had fled into the buffer zone in such a chaotic state. He was worried that the army would fall into chaos, so he was in a hurry to reorganize and calm them down. Who would have thought that those damned native ferocious beasts would actually set up an ambush here in advance without any pursuers? Moreover, the ambush was only a little cosmic realm devil ape? Even though the bloodline of this little devil ape was extraordinary, and its true form of a devil ape with 3 heads and 6 arms was extremely shocking, it still hadn't fully matured. It was merely at the cosmic realm, yet it had been able to kill a region lord from the allied army by underhanded means. If this matter were to spread, it would be a great humiliation. More importantly, Zhao Kong had no way of explaining this matter to the Colored Python clan. Their region lord old monster had been heavily injured, so he should have been responsible for protecting them. Moreover, the entire army originally had 2 region lords. As long as they reorganized and found a way to deal with the 2 primordial porcupines and primordial tortoises, they might have been able to fight. But now everything was over, and he was the only domain lord left, so there was no way he could defeat the other party. He could only hole up in this buffer zone and guard the stable passageway that he had painstakingly opened up, waiting for reinforcements to arrive. In other words, Zhao Kong was basically useless in this battle. When he returned to the second universe, he would be questioned by the Colored Python clan. It was simply not worth it. Thinking of this, Zhao Kong even had the heart to die. With a furious roar, he immediately activated his bloodline true body. In the blink of an eye, a terrifying blood dragon that was tens of thousands of meters long soared through the sky and chased after Yi Xian. Seeing this scene, Yi Xian was so scared that his soul almost left his body. This was an old monster from the Domain Lord realm. With his current strength, although he had already reached the 14th Great Realm, the Cosmic Light Realm, if he were to fight with the supreme power of the universe, he would really dare to fight head-on. However, if he were to face a Star-Lord old monster, even if he could hold on for a while, he would definitely have to flee while fighting. As for the old monsters of the Domain Lords, they would definitely die. There was no chance of survival. Fortunately, the dividing line to enter the core hinterland was only a few dozen kilometers away. Yi Xian only needed a flash to cross the dividing line and arrive at the core hinterland. After he entered the core hinterland, the scene before his eyes was a complete mess. Countless corpses floated in midair. There were the corpses of the experts of the various clans of the second universe and the native ferocious beasts of the core hinterland. Moreover, most of them belonged to the latter. However, in Yi Xian's opinion, so long as it was a bloodline true body, then he could store it within the farmer god cauldron and slowly enjoy it in the future. Unfortunately, he didn't have the mood to do that at all. There was a region lord old monster pursuing him from behind. As for the reinforcements he was looking forward to, it was the formidable native ferocious beast that had crushed the allied forces of the second universe to the point they fled in a sorry state. Obviously, it was impossible for it to be at the edge of the core hinterland. It should be at the depths of the core hinterland, which was filled with the corpses of primordial beings. If the blood flood dragon caught up to him before he arrived there, then it would truly be a tragedy for him. When he thought up to here, Yi Xian didn't hesitate any longer. His figure flashed as he immediately teleported through space. Moreover, he teleported incessantly. His devil ape true body flickered incessantly in space, and every single flicker would cross a distance of 500,000 kilometers. After a few such teleportations, a terrifying pressure assaulted him from the direction of the dividing line a few million kilometers behind him. The blood flood dragon had really caught up to him, and it was rumbling over. Yi Xian was terrified to the point his scalp constricted, and he didn't dare turn around. His right hand held the 30 long 7-colored python head as he continued teleporting towards the depths of the core hinterland. After a few more teleportations, Yi Xian raised his head and saw 2 native ferocious beasts appear in space ahead of him. One was a completely pitch-black porcupine that was around 300 long, and the other was actually a turtle that was around 3 long. Its entire body was covered in green fur, and it was furry like a green ball of fur. When Yi Xian saw them, the porcupine and turtle noticed Yi Xian as well. Their expressions were clearly stunned, and they stared fixedly at him as if they'd seen a ghost. Yi Xian teleported once more, and his figure flashed before the black porcupine that was around 300 long. He stomped his right foot forcefully on the porcupine and immediately cursed. "What are you standing there for? Quickly take me to see your king. Didn't you see that I cut off the head of a region lord? Do you believe that I'll kill you if you continue to stand there?" Before he finished speaking, the green-furred turtle that was around 3 long had already landed on the head of Yi Xian's body. It stretched out its furry green claws and patted him twice. Then, It directly climbed up his neck to the golden skull of the other skeleton, and patted it a few times as it did before. It even muttered, "Really? It's really the devil ape real? But isn't this cultivation too weak? Where did it come from?" When he heard that this little turtle actually thought that his cultivation was too weak, Xian was immediately displeased. What made him even more displeased was the turtle's actions and the color of its dense fur. Chapter 37:10. Xian was truly anxious. There was a region lord blood serpent chasing after him, but it just so happened that he didn't run into any powerful local ferocious beasts, even though he was deep in the core of the source of all evil. Instead, he ran into a black porcupine that was over 300 meters long and a green hairy tortoise. In his anxiety, not only did he stomp on the porcupine, he even pulled the tortoise in front of him and threatened to kill the two of them. The scene was so shocking that the blood serpent that was chasing after him was dumbfounded. It suddenly stopped thousands of kilometers away and didn't dare to move forward. A guy who could stomp on the porcupine and pull the primordial tortoise in front of him like a pet wasn't someone he could afford to offend. If nothing unexpected happened, then this little devil ape probably had a backer. That old man's cultivation was absolutely not merely at the region lord realm, and it was at least at the world lord realm. The blood serpent immediately lost confidence when he thought of that. At this point, he had basically figured out the nature of the local ferocious beasts in the source of all evil. These guys obviously knew that the void formation in the depths of the core hinterland was a great fortune. Therefore, the closer they were to the core, the more powerful the local ferocious beasts would be. Furthermore, as long as you didn't disturb them or jump into their territory to make a scene, they could do whatever they wanted in the periphery. They would basically ignore them. For example, the army of the second universe had cleared the periphery of the core and killed countless local ferocious beasts, but there was no movement deep in the core. Nobody paid attention to them. It wasn't until the last 10 million soldiers charged into the depths of the core hinterland that the primordial porcupine and primordial hairy tortoise appeared. They led the remnants of the army that had escaped and charged over. Then, the army of 10 million fled in disorder. One of the two region lords had severed his bloodline true body and dropped to the Star Lord state. It should have been the best opportunity to hunt them down. However, the porcupine and the tortoise didn't have that intention at all. From this, it could be seen that as long as they did not provoke them, staying in the buffer zone outside of the central region would not cause any trouble. It was precisely because of this that Jiao Kong had chased after them in a fit of rage. In his opinion, it was only a little devil ape cub that was only at the cosmic light realm. He could just turn around and leave after capturing it. It wouldn't attract any trouble at all. But now, it seemed that things weren't like that. This little devil ape's origins aren't small, and the backing behind it is at least at the world lord realm. Otherwise, why would it act so casually towards region lords like the primeval porcupine and primeval turtle? It was no wonder that it dared to hide in the buffer zone of the central region and cut off the head of an old monster with a single slash. As expected, he was extremely daring. He was used to running amok in this starfield, the source of all evil. Now that Jiao Kong had chased him away, what if he was pissed off and complained to the emperor? At that time, the ancient ape demons, who might be hiding somewhere in the core of the central region and was too lazy to care about the outside world, would definitely be in trouble. Even if that realm lord wasn't alarmed, the little devil would only scold the porcupine and the tortoise and ask them to chase after him. Then, it would be difficult to settle this matter peacefully. More importantly, through this little devil ape cub that dared to stomp on an immemorial boar and hold an immemorial tortoise in front of him, Jiao Kong could basically confirm that there was a sector lord level immemorial ape hibernating in the depths of the core region ahead of them. In this way, even if Du Jiting didn't die, he would never dare to go to the central region again. The only thing he could do was to retreat immediately to the outer region of the source of all evil. At the same time, he sent out a fleet of scouts to report the information back to the bases of the races in the second universe as soon as possible. He asked the old fellows of his race to urgently discuss countermeasures. In short, he would absolutely not dare to go any further before the reinforcements arrived. He would at most guard the stable passageway that traversed the outer region of the source of all evil. As for the region lord of the colored python race, Du Jiting, he had perished in any case. Moreover, it was because of his own carelessness. Could it be that he had no choice but to be buried with him? Not to mention that they weren't from the same race. Even if they were from the same race and were related by blood, it would absolutely not be to such an extent. When he thought up to this point, Jiao Kong immediately removed his bloodline true body, and the blood WYRM that lay across space vanished to reveal his human form. Moreover, there was even a smile on his face. However, his smile was truly quite terrifying, and it was simply uglier than crying. He cupped his fists and shouted at Yixian and the other two region lords from afar. "Fellow Taoist porcupine, fellow Taoist tortoise, please don't misunderstand. I have no ill intentions. It's just that it's too dangerous for this young fellow cultivator to be alone outside. I've escorted him all the way here. Since there's nothing else, I'll take my leave first. Please don't send me off." Without waiting for him to finish speaking, Zhao Kong's figure flashed, and he fled without looking back. In the blink of an eye, he had already passed through the dividing line, disappearing from the core of the source of all evil, and escaping to the buffer zone of the central region. At the same time, a huge army of native beasts finally appeared in the depths of the central region. They were clearly led by a few top-level beasts who were emitting the aura of Star Lords. They included the humanoid talkative monster that Yixian had seen last time, the queen of the black beetles that had just advanced, and some Star Lords that he had never seen before. Behind those Star Lords was a group of native beasts that were as strong as Universe Lords. Behind them were the Cosmic State, the Genesis State. What caused Yixian to be a little dazed was that when the entire enormous army of savage beasts reached the void tens of thousands of kilometers away, they all stopped. All of their eyes were filled with reverence as their gazes converged in this direction. These gazes were basically focused on the black porcupine beneath his feet and the green tortoise that he was still holding in his hand. However, a portion of them would occasionally sweep their gazes over Yixian's body with deep curiosity and doubt. Well, Yixian suddenly felt that his blood was freezing. Even though he was slow, he realized what was going on at that moment. Regardless of whether it was the words and reaction of that region lord from the Blood Wyrm clan or the expressions and reactions of the countless native ferocious beasts in the enormous army of native ferocious beasts before them, all of them undoubtedly proved a problem. That was the black porcupine and green tortoise that he was currently stepping on and gripping in his hand. They were not as weak as he thought they were at all. If nothing unexpected happened, there would be at least 2 old monsters in the Domain Lord realm. The 2 of them were the ones who had forced the Second Universe's allied forces to flee in a sorry state.